Well, welcome. This is kind of a different thing for us to do this year. We never have done anything like this before, so we hope that you are patient if we do have any technical glitches today as we try to deal with these unprecedented times. You know, this is our 38th year of TERT, and we've been through all kinds of difficulties and challenges over the years. This is the first time we've had like a global pandemic to make things interesting for us. We appreciate all those that have helped out with preparing the training for today, and those that we'll be hearing from. Especially like to thank and make a call out to M10 Marketing. We're in their facility and using their internet today to do this training, so we could have the technical gear all together and make this work. So big call out to them and thanks. Thanks to Jared Madsen. He's the one that's driving this, and we'll hear from him a little bit today, but he's behind the scenes. We've also got Chris Black is also manning the chat area. So if you do have any questions or anything during this presentation, if you submit them through the chat, and he will filter those out and bring them to our attention as we go on. Also, it's kind of a matter of business. You know, we communicate through email and communicate through the website and Facebook groups. That's a good way to reach us and to communicate with us. So as questions or concerns arise in the coming weeks and months, please reach out to the team leadership to let us know your concerns and what we're doing right or wrong. We're trying to figure out right now, you know, what we're going to be doing this year. There's a lot of things that are going to change, obviously. This is one of the first of many things, and hopefully we'll be able to make this through and be able to serve the community and do what we need to support the Sheriff's Office and the Forest Service. Just another comment, you know, as we talk about responding and being in the public, you know, the first thing you do when you talk about first responders is seeing safety. We have to make sure it's safe for the responders, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And so, obviously, at this time, we're hoping that all of you are taking care of yourselves, are doing what's necessary to keep you and your families safe and healthy. As we get to summer and our normal TERT season time, we also ask you to make sure that you're taking that into consideration, that you only participate if you feel safe and if you feel like you can do so without endangering yourself. That's our first priority, is the safety of the volunteers. So that's kind of the introductions for the start of this program. We're going to turn it over for a brief message to our Sergeant Josh Chappell.
All right, Josh, go ahead, and we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome. Hey, thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. I want you to all know that I'm super excited to be part of emergency management, part of TERT, and I look forward to working with all of you. I thought I would just give you kind of a brief introduction of who I am, where I come from, and then we'd kind of go into a couple other things. But first of all, like I said, I'm Chappell. I've spent about 19 years in law enforcement. Um, I was born and raised in Utah County. I currently live in Spanish Fork with my son, and we're and I guess the majority of my time has been spent in investigations, and it's just been the last month or so that I've had the opportunity to work in emergency management. So I'm super excited to be there. Now, over the last month or so, I've had the opportunity to meet many of the volunteers that are associated with search and rescue, TERT, many of the organizations that make up emergency management or emergency. It's recognized by all. The sheriff and undersheriff are continually giving me and wanting you to know that they appreciate what you do. There's no question in my mind that what you do on the mountain of Timpanogos and in our community, that you do save lives, and you help people you help people be safer and exercise good safety, and that's a majority of what we do. said, moving forward, it's unprecedented times. This COVID-19's got a lot of things kind of stuff, but we're going to move forward as would normally do. We're going to prepare that we will do business as normal on the mountain. And a couple of just want to talk about that, again, we to deal with any accidents or situations on the mountain. But we, I hope we can improve maybe our focus in preventative measures, being proactive at our trailheads, encouraging people to be safe, making sure good, good communication and teaching and instructing and helping those that are going on the mountain to do. Anyway, I think I most of my time, but just to conclude, I look forward to meeting many of you. I've been so impressed with the church ICS command staff, the board. I've had an opportunity over the last month or so to meet with many of them. Man, what a great organization led by great people, and I appreciate their willingness to serve and to put all this together. It's amazing that here we are. There's many of us meeting all around the county today to be instructed and to be trained. And so thank you for all what you do. And when I express that appreciation, know that it's coming from the top. It's coming from the sheriff and the undersheriff, and they appreciate what you do. Again, I look forward to meeting many of you next month at our outdoor training. And thank you. And I'm grateful to be part of the team.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant Josh Chappell. We appreciate your time, taking time out of your busy schedule to join with us. We'll go ahead and bring it back to Andrew. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. And I should mention that, so Sergeant Chappell is new with us this year. He comes from the sheriff's office many years, but he just basically joined us this year to replace Sergeant Cantor, who worked with us for years. And so we're appreciative of him, his time and efforts. He's been very involved with us so far this year. I should also make mention, maybe to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Barney. I am the Executive Director of TERT. We had a lot of changes this year in the organization, and those were emailed out earlier in the year. You okay? And just to call out to Glenn Meyer, who's not able to join us today, but he served in the role of Executive Director for 37 years. We're gonna definitely recognize him more. We wanted to do something bigger today and better, but that's gonna have to be delayed for now because of the circumstances. But we have a board of directors that oversees, and we meet on a regular basis and have been discussing what are we gonna do this year and how we're going to proceed. And one of the things we also do is we work with the supporting agencies. That's the Sheriff's Office, who we just heard from Sergeant Chappell, as well as the Forest Service. The Forest Service has sponsored us from the beginning as well. We don't have anybody representing the Forest Service here today, but they're very supportive of us. They help to provide funding for the team that provides for equipment and gear that we use every year. So we're grateful for them. We couldn't do this without the support of the Forest Service. One of the things we do working with the Forest Service is they do ask us to do some things for them. And particularly, we educate the public as they come into the Mount Timpanogos Wilderness area. We help to educate them about the wilderness limitations, restrictions, like no campfires. We work with them on picking up trash in the wilderness area people leave behind, as well as, don't pick the wildflowers. We have a program that they sponsor with us every year. And we anticipate a similar program to be implemented this year. We won't know the details until around the May timeframe when they release them. But we'll provide a sign up for those that are interested in participating in this program. They do provide, for the number of volunteer hours that we do with the Forest Service, they do recognize us. And if you do enough hours, then we actually can get up to passes for the Alpine Loop recreation area. So look for an email to come announcing the program and what you need to do to sign up every year. If you did participate last year, you have to sign up this year again. So it's an annual thing we have to do to get sign-ups for. So look for that. The information will be coming on that. We don't have that today. But it is important to really maintain that relationship with the Forest Service, that we participate with them on these types of programs. And it gives us something to do while we're not responding and rescuing people on the mountain. So it's a good opportunity, to teach people about leave no trace principles and wilderness principles while we're up there. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it now back over to Jared to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, next up we're going to be hearing from Shem, Flitton, one of our team leaders, and hopefully we've got audio from him. Shem, let's go ahead and say a few words. Oh, good, I can hear you there now. Shem's going to talk about some of the perks and pro deals that we have lined up for team leaders, and it's a program that's based on participation from year to year, and yeah, I'll leave the rest to him. I don't want to steal his thunder. So thanks for joining us, Shem.
Okay, first of all, just want to clarify, this isn't just for team leaders, but for all team members who meet requirements for activity, which basically means participating in a spring training and serving 2 weekends up at high camp or trailhead, or correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, I think it was 3 weekends at Stewart Falls.
5 points total, and then the way you get those points is for a trailhead or high camp weekend, those count as 2 points, and then a Stewart Falls 1 point, and then each training day is 1 point.
Okay, so four Stewart Falls and 1 training. Anyway, so you get the general idea, but the idea is we've been working with various organizations, Outdoor Pro Link. I'm still working with Expert Voice to solidify things, but these give us access to pro deals, to gear, to clothing, and to equipment at discounted rates. For example, Leatherman has one that's 40% off the price of their tools. You can get access to shoes, to hiking boots, to ropes, to a lot of the gear that we use, bags, backpacks, or things that you might use in other places. The idea is that you learn to what you like, and then we'll people who ask questions about gear. But we don't talk about these discounts to people outside of church, and it's available to people who, in the previous season, were met the requirements.
Oops, my audio's off. Thanks again, Shem, for heading up this program. We appreciate it, and we look forward to the benefits that it will bring to the team. We're going to cut back into the studio again here. We've got a little bit of information with regard to signups and how that will be handled.
Okay, so Chris Black, who is a member of the board and has been involved with TERT for a long time, is the one that manages the signups. But I'm going to talk about it briefly. So we manage signups, and this is for the different positions that we fill in the course of a season. So we have the trailheads, we have high camp, and the information about those we can talk about and available online. We do have positions that we fill for those different signups. Online is the way we do it. It will be the same as last year. So those that participated last year, it'll be the same. We are planning right now we're anticipating a normal season with TERT. We're going to plan to staff and fill all the roles in all the different positions as we normally would. We're anticipating a normal year for snow right now. The next month or two will tell us whether or not we will be going up on a normal schedule, but we need to still plan and get signups for everything in advance. This gives everybody an opportunity to plan their summers, to work with, what's available on their schedule. Now, as we get closer to the beginning of the season, we'll be more specific on, are we going to be sending up high camp at the beginning of July like we normally would? Are we going to be doing trailhead like we normally would? Or will the pandemic make changes? Okay. Will the pandemic change how we do signups or how we participate this year? And that information we'll provide as we get closer and as we know what to expect on that. But we still want people to sign up. We want you to get your name in there, put it on your calendars, to make the plans to be there for those assignments. And then we'll work to be flexible as we begin the season and see how the snow is and how the pandemic might affect or change how we volunteer this year. Those links will be emailed out later today. So look forward to an email from Chris announcing the opening of signups and where you need to go. It's a web page. You go in there. It might ask you for some information if you have never been in there before, and then basically you select. We do ask with high camp particularly that you only sign up for the positions that you are qualified to fill. So there'll be a radio communication position. We need you to have a ham radio license if you sign up for that position. For medical, we want you to have at least some medical training experience and be comfortable to take lead on medical incidents. And so, and of course, the team leader spots are only for those that are team leaders on the team. There are openings for other roles that don't meet those qualifications, or if those positions are already filled, like if you're a radio operator and that position is already taken for a weekend, you can sign up for the other slot. That's what's it called? Other? I can't remember the exact how we label it, but there's a category where anybody can sign up, whether or not you have any experience or training, and those are open to anybody on the team. So if there's questions about signups or what you needed to do, please reach out to Chris, myself, and we can take care of that, those questions. And just to call out, I think we're up to, how many people are on the live stream right now? What number we're up to?
87.
87 people have joined us. That's amazing. That's better than we normally have as a turnout at an indoor training. So thank you for coming and for being here today and spending the time with us in this unusual circumstances. Now I'd like to turn the time over back to Jared, who will introduce Mark Gerberding.
All right, so Mark Gerberding is going to be speaking with us about equipment. He's our director of logistics and also takes care of kind of quartermaster duties for the team. So go ahead and turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jared. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the equipment changes that we had at the end of last season and what we're planning for this year. First, we'll start with medical equipment. As you know, a couple of years ago, we purchased some pulse oximeters. They were the $30 Amazon variety, and they work quite well. We've had a couple issues with them, and so we're going to replace those this year. We decided to go with more of a clinical grade pulse oximeter, and so we're going to be purchasing those. They're better when the patient has low perfusion, darker skin tones. They also work on fingers, thumbs, and toes. And they're quite rugged. They're actually supposed to survive about 50 drops. Please don't test that, but they're supposed to be quite rugged, and so we're getting those. But high camp, we're also getting a lot more taping gear for wrists, ankles, and so forth. Pre-wrap tape, adhesive spray, and so forth. Also, each med pack has a list of gear in it, so you can find it and know what the inventory should be, and those will be updated this year. At high camp, the tents that we have at high camp were deployed August of 2014, so they're 6 years old now, and we're going to replace those. Also, the chairs at high camp are worn out, so we're going to replace them with both the large chairs that have arms, kind of the full-size camp chair, and then there's also been requests that we have the Helinox type chair, and so we're going to get a few of those too, so you can pick which one you prefer. If you don't want to carry the heavier one to high camp, you can grab a Helinox instead. We also are planning on getting 1 or 2 frame packs, so it's easier to haul the Thomas pack and other gear up to high camp. And then at high camp, we also have a new Omni antenna for the shelter at Emerald Lake. It's a mag mount. You just climb up, put it on top, and we're hoping that that will enhance communications. At the Timpaniki Trailhead, last year, it was the last day before they closed the Alpine Loop, essentially. We installed 2 new antennas there. As you know, Timpaniki has had a couple issues with communications the last year or two. And so we have a new beam and a new Omni. The new beam is incredible. We were able to talk to Aspen Grove with 5 watts. It was a little scratchy and steamy. At 30 watts, it was awesome. And the old beam wouldn't even break squelch. So it's a good upgrade. But there's both of those new antennas at Timpaniki. At Aspen Grove, we installed an Omni antenna. You might be aware that Michael Proust would hang a J-pole in the tree every year for the Omni to augment the beam, but we've installed an Omni there. Also, both trailheads will now have dual needle SWR meters. We had an issue a few years ago where we had a radio that was only putting out about 100 milliwatts due to a power issue. And with the dual needle SWR meter, you'll be able to look at both the forward and reflected power each weekend. We plan on having it in line all the time. There's a very low insertion loss from the SWR meter, and it would have helped diagnose a number of problems over the years. So we'll have those dual needle SWR meters so we can see forward and reflective power. That's really all that I have for the update. As always, if you have any suggestions on gear that we can purchase that will help TERT be a better public servant, help us do our jobs better, help us give better service to the public, please email me. My email address is on the website. And that's it. Thanks, Jared.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate all you do. And thanks for joining us remote today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We will go ahead then and cut back to the studio here where we've got Andrew, who will introduce our next presenter.
Okay, I'm here with Heidi Vawdrey. I'm going to be reading her bio here to introduce her. She's been a TERT member since 1996, and she has a ham license. She's a KC7OXP. You might have heard her on the mountain before. She comes up regularly with us. She's been a first responder as an EMT, 3 years as a scout camp medical director. Now she's registered nurse and has been, at BYU, 17 years critical care experience, doctorate of nursing practice at U of U, and now 3 years medical family medicine experience, and now also an adjunct faculty at the University of Utah College of Nursing. So she is very experienced with TERT and very just tremendous on the medical knowledge. And so she's going to be working today. Oh, some random things I didn't pick up on. 7 years of volunteer work in infant bereavement services, 50+ community outreach seminars taught on suicide prevention and mental health. She has a fondness for baking, hiking, hanging out with friends when not in quarantine. She's married to Alan, has 4 kids, 4 great kids. And even after she was married, they still would come up. And some of you might know that she had an incident. Do you remember what year it was?
That was 20 years ago.
20 years ago, so 2000?
No, it was actually 99. It was the year
99. When she was hiking up with her husband onto high camp, there was a rock slide, and it was in the evening, and they couldn't see it at first, and they could hear it, but then the rocks came on top of them. They're near below high camp, if you know where I'm talking about, in those switchbacks. And she had to be rescued by search and rescue, which she knew a lot of people on search and rescue, so it was a lot of fun to get them, pull her off the mountain. But she came back. She's been with us regularly, and we're really grateful that she could take the time out today to be here with us because she is a first responder working with all the response with COVID-19. So we're grateful to have her today and to learn from her. I'll turn back to Heidi now.
Okay, I'm going to kick Andrew out of the scene here, take off my mask. This is just your friendly reminder to obey the CDC recommendations to mask when you're out in public. Later on when we do our scenarios and we're closer than 6 feet, we won't be masked. But in general, this is something that I'm recommending to my patients, and I'm practicing myself to keep myself safe. So let's talk about being first on scene on the mountain. Everyone that's affiliated with the team, whether you have medical training or not, when you come up and represent yourself as a TERT member, people expect you to be able to have some level of ability to assess their injuries or their illness. And so the point of this presentation is just to teach everyone, no matter what, and also just recognizing the people who have worked in other aspects of medicines. Maybe they're like a med-surg nurse or something like that, and they've never really done first aid. This is a different style of medicine than what you're used to. So the idea here is to teach you some of the basic techniques that you learn in EMT school about how to get some really important elements of the patient history so that you can communicate that back to the team. The thing that's really challenging about being on the mountain is that the response time is so long. So we can get a call and it can be an hour or maybe even 2 hours before we make contact with that person. So things can change a lot in that time. So then say we make contact with them, but then search and rescue is another 45 minutes or an hour behind that. So it's important for us to all know how to get this information and be able to relay the correct information and changes in condition so that you can make that assessment of, okay, it's getting dark now, things are not going well. I think that what was going to be an on-foot evacuation has now transitioned to potentially a helicopter evacuation. So the point of this is that everyone is our first responder on the mountain. When you get, say you're a person that's at the trailhead, or you're over at Stewart Falls and a call comes like, hey, we've got someone on the trail somewhere here along the way. They're not like right here in front of you. We need someone to go respond and to check on this person and get more information so that we can determine if we're doing the right thing for a response. The first thing you need to do is to check yourself. The number one thing we want to avoid is for our team members to somehow create a liability to become a victim. Like Andrew mentioned many years ago when I was newlyweds, it was like, hey, we're married. Let's go up on the mountain. This is going to be real fun. And then we got hit by a rock slide. So that wasn't great. In that case, it was dark. We had gone slower than we thought. We did have headlights, but it's difficult to see a rock slide coming at you with the headlights, those kinds of things. So you need to check yourself before you go up, before you leave your house. But then even more importantly, once you're on the mountain, whether you're at Trailhead, whether you're at High Camp, whether you're at Stewart Falls, you have to check yourself and make sure that you're in good enough physical condition. So if we say, hey, we need someone to run from the Timpaniki Trailhead up to Scout Falls, or from Aspen Grove up to somewhere around Primrose Cirque, are you in good enough shape to actually run up there and not get sick or hurt or injured yourself? Okay. The next thing is, do you have enough clothing to keep yourself warm and dry? Anyone who's been up on the mountain before knows that the conditions on the mountain change rapidly. You can go from tank top and shorts down at the trailhead to all of a sudden wishing you had your winter coat and gloves towards the top. And then you could drop back down into the basin and you're shedding layers again. So if you're leaving anywhere within the small area that you are and you feel comfortable with, you have your supplies, you need to make sure that you have supplies with you to keep you warm and dry. Need to make sure you have a light source. Last season we had an incident where we sent a trailhead member up from the Timpaniki side to find someone. It was really vague directions, and this is common, where they said the person we think is about a mile up the trail. And that trailhead person wound up going further and further and further up the trail, 2 miles, 2.5 miles, and it was getting dark. And we didn't have that person, the trailhead person had thought like, hey, if this is just a mile, I'm fine. Didn't bring a light source with them, and it began to get dark. And so then at that point, the team becomes a liability instead of something that's assistive. The other thing is having enough water for yourself and to share if you need. When you're coming up to hike with the team, you have to lose this idea that you only need to bring what you need for yourself. That doesn't mean you need to bring 10 liters of water, but if you have one extra water bottle that you can share, that can mean the difference between someone being able to hike themselves out or a rescue. If you're a radio operator, you need to make sure that you have the adequate supplies for that, your antenna, those kinds of things. And then also I recommend everyone on the team carry at least a small first aid kit. In my next lecture, we're going to go into a little more detail about some things you might consider including in that. But again, if you're showing up representing as a member of TERT, even if you are not one of the medical people, people are still going to expect you to have at least basic Band-Aids and those kinds of things. You need to also be super mindful of the conditions. One of the things that we do on the mountain is frequently check in with the high camp people and the trailhead people with weather reports. We have the little doohickey thing, I can't remember what it's called, that you can check wind speed and temperature and those kinds of things. And so we can give updates about how things are going on at the top. But like I mentioned before, weather changes dramatically and frequently on the mountain. I swear it's got its own microcosm of weather. And if you ever just look from the valley can be quite clear, and then you look over at Timp and it's socked in with clouds all around the top of it. You also need to be mindful of snow, ice, or mud on the trail. It can be perfectly fine at trailhead, and then a mile up the trail, all of a sudden you're hitting ice. I carry Catula micro spikes. Those are my spike of choice when I'm hiking to keep me safe. And then you also need to really be mindful of, is the scene safe around the patient once you get there? Next slide. So this is an acronym that I want you to become familiar with. Before the training, Jared emailed out a sample history, this is just a little template that I made that has two different formats of ways for you to gather the pertinent history so that you can write it down so that when you're giving a report to the team leader, to the medical person, you have this standardized format of communicating the really important information. So the first thing are in sample, SAMPLE, we have this acronym here to help you remember it. The first thing is signs and symptoms. Signs are something that you observe, like, gosh, I saw that the leg was broken. It's very obvious that there's deformity. Or I noticed that the patient looks like they're behaving kind of weirdly. You know, they're not breathing very well. They don't look like they are fully with it. That's signs. Symptoms are what the patient tells you. So you say, hey, how are you feeling? And they say, oh, not very good, I'm not breathing very well, I have pain, those kinds of things. Signs and symptoms, that's the first and foremost. That's going to help guide our decisions on what we do next. For allergies, you need to know both medication allergies as well as environmental or food allergies. These are important because oftentimes on the mountain, unlike when you take someone to the emergency room or to the urgent care, if we're going to be with them for 4 or 5 hours, potentially, you might need to feed them. You don't want to inadvertently feed them something that now throws them into anaphylaxis. Okay, so that's important to know. It's also important to know their medication allergies up front, because if they lose consciousness and then we wind up doing an evacuation, you want to avoid harm. You don't want the helicopter crew or the search and rescue crew to give them a medication that they could potentially react to. So those are important things, even though in your head you're thinking, I'm not necessarily giving this person medication. You need to know that information to pass on. Medications can be a really important clue for you about what health conditions they may have. I work in primary care. It's very common for people to tell me, like, no, I don't really have any chronic conditions. And then you ask them what medications they're on, and they say, oh, I'm on lisinopril, I'm on metformin, I'm on Synthroid. And you say, okay, so you have high blood pressure, you have type 2 diabetes, and you have hypothyroidism. They're like, oh, yeah, I do have those things, okay? So even if you don't know the significance of what those medications mean, relaying that information is valuable for the medical person to help decide, again, how much risk there is in keeping this person on the mountain and trying to self-evacuate, or whether this is something that's more serious. You also want to know about what supplements people take. I have a lot of patients that take, and myself included, honestly, a fistful of supplements, and those can have significance in their condition. And so it's important to get that information as completely as you can. Again, because if the patient were to lose consciousness and can no longer tell you that information, that's really important for their treatment down the road. For pertinent medical history, this is difficult for someone who doesn't have medical training to decide what's pertinent and what's not. What I want to know from you and what you can gather is just ask them if they have any chronic health conditions that they have been that they've been having treated long-term by a provider, Or the other things that are important are like things like, hey, I had a spinal fusion surgery a year ago, and now I can't feel my toes. And so medical history can include surgical history. If they're there for an injury and it's their knee, you want to know that they've already had that knee scoped 4 times. That's important history to pass along, okay? The last oral intake is important for us on the mountain to determine if they are dehydrated or potentially, hypoglycemic, meaning their blood sugar is low, they're hangry, I guess is the better thing to apply to that. Everything's worse when you're hangry and when you're dehydrated. But also if someone were to have a catastrophic injury that would require surgery, then they need to know when the person last ate before they're going to put them under anesthesia. So that's important on 2 respects there. And then last but not least, and actually very importantly, are what happened to bring you up to this point? When did you start feeling sick? What was happening when you slipped and fell? Did anything hit you on the head as you fell? You want to know more detail about what went on, what led up to them actually calling for help in some way, shape, or form. Next slide, Jared.
Okay.
The next mnemonic that's helpful is for you to make sure that you get all the information that's important for a pain assessment. This is the OPQRST pain mnemonic. Onset is, hey, what was happening when the pain started? Was there an injury, or is this something that just kind of came on, like your knee started hurting when you were coming off the top and then it's gotten worse and worse and worse, but there was not a specific, like you didn't hear a pop or feel a grind or any of those kinds of things. You want to know more about that. So there's some overlap between this and what you see in the sample history. The next one is provocation. What makes it worse? Like, I'm okay until I step on my ankle, or I'm okay, and like if I have abdominal pain, I'm okay until I try and eat something, and then it's so much worse. Or if I cough or sneeze, that hurts really bad. The next thing is quality. And we want to know, is this sharp stabbing pain? Is this knife-like? Is it just like a dull kind of ache, something that you can kind of work through? Is it burning pain? Again, you as a not necessarily trained medical person don't have to make sense of this. We just need this information on the back end so that we can make a better decision about the disposition of the patient. So if someone has a history of a spinal fusion surgery in the past, or of a discectomy or something like that, where they've had some disc surgery on their back, and now all of a sudden they have burning, shooting pain down their leg, then that could tell me that maybe they've done something to disrupt the repair of their disc disease, and so it wouldn't be a good idea to have them hiking all the way down the mountain. That's why this information is important for me on the back end. We just need you to gather the details. The next thing is, where does it hurt, and is it spreading to somewhere else? So someone starts with back pain down here, but now it's shooting down their leg. That's important for me to know. They have rib pain, and now it's radiating across their entire rib cage and making it really difficult for them to breathe. They have hip pain that's now shooting down to their knee, those kinds of things. The next thing is severity. This is pretty straightforward, 0 to 10 scale. My experience in being a nurse for a lot of years is that there's wildly different interpretations of what a 10 out of 10 means. But you can typically tell when someone is really, really in severe pain, but you do want them to rate it on a 0 to 10 scale. That's important because as you're with this person for a long time, you can ask them again, hey, how's that pain doing? Are you still at a 5 out of 10, or is it getting worse? Like, I want to know. So again, we can decide if we need to adjust our plan about what we're doing to help get you off the mountain. And then the time here is, how long has it been hurting? When did you initially notice that the time that the pain started? Next slide, please, Jared. So let's say you're Johnny from Trailhead, no first aid training particularly, you're a ham radio operator. You came running up the mountain, you found the person on the trail somewhere along, you've gone through, you've got your little sheet to help you remember how to do this sample history. You've got your little first aid kit, good job. You've got your jacket, your extra water, thumbs up, everything's good. Here's some basic guidelines for what we need to do to make sure you're getting the right information when you come up there. First is looking at scene safety. So an example of when my husband and I were hit by the rock slide, as soon as the rocks stopped falling, we were in a stretch of rocks. It was probably a 75 to 100 foot long rock chute up in the upper switchbacks just below high camp. And so as soon as the rocks stopped falling, our first priority was to get out of the path of a rock slide. That seems obvious, but people tend to get kind of tunnel vision. So if you look at the source of the injury and the source is still there, it's still potentially a threat, you need to manage that and make sure you're safe. The next thing is looking at the general appearance of the patient. You can tell a whole lot about someone. If they're sitting there and like they came up in flip-flops and shorts and a bikini, and it's now cold and wet and raining, then that's part of your assessment. Are they adequately clothed? Do they look like they're alert, like, hey, I've just got a little scratch on my leg? Or are you seeing someone that looks like, you know, they look distressed. They look like they're having a hard time breathing. They look drowsy, all those kinds of things. This is all part of your assessment, and this takes seconds to come up with this information. So we're looking for your general impression. Does the person look sick or not sick? Okay. When you're looking at injuries, sometimes injuries are really obvious and sometimes they're not. You have to be careful not to be distracted by something that looks spectacular, like a really big abrasion, but maybe it's covering up something that's a little bit more hidden. But we'll get more into that in the urgent care on the mountain thing. But you're just looking for, like, this person is sick, not sick, and I see them like crouched over holding their belly, or they're cradling their arm and they don't want to move it. That's your basic obvious assessment. The next thing is this breathing assessment. If someone can speak in long sentences without needing to catch their breath, that's a really good sign. If they're answering you in 1 or 2 word sentences, kind of, you know, gasping and just short, then that can mean that they're having a hard time breathing. We're going to go into how to check the heart rate and respiratory rate here in a second, but one of my favorite ways to do it is to have you actually rest your hand on the back of the person. And like while you're talking to them, so don't tell them like, hey, I'm going to count how fast you're breathing, because then they'll breathe funny. So, you know, you just come up to them, hey, just want to check on you, put your hand on their back, and while they're breathing, you watch your watch and count for 15 seconds, then multiply that by 4. For circulation, when we're checking for a pulse, if someone has a really strong radial pulse, and I have to look at the screen, see how I'm doing, radial pulse, then that means that the top number of their blood pressure is at least 80. And so that's good. They're perfusing their brain and stuff. But if you go to feel this and you're like, I don't know, that one's really hard to find, but I can at least find the carotid. Okay, they still have some circulation going on, but maybe their blood pressure's dropping. So we want to know the quality of the pulse and where you're able to find it most easily. Jared, next slide. Awesome. So correct location for finding the pulse. It turns out if you search for images for checking pulses, you see all sorts of really inaccurate pictures. Ones where they're like checking kind of partway down the forearm. When you're trying to find a radial pulse, then you're finding your radius. This is the bone up here on the top side of your wrist. It radiates to your thumb. And then you should slide into the groove right next to that. And between that and the tendons that you feel kind of coming up on your wrist there, you should be able to feel a pulse. Some people have a stronger pulse up here on the top side of their wrist, but you should practice this on your friends and family members that are within your circle of quarantine safety. So maybe just on your family members, but practice finding the pulse on a variety of different people. Use your fingers, don't use your thumb, because you can sometimes feel the pulse in your own thumb rather than the patient's actual pulse. So practice finding a pulse and then actually counting it. This is a little bit more tricky than you may think, to actually count the pulse, and again for 15 seconds and then multiply by 4. Or if you're really an overachiever, you can sit there and hold their hand for a full minute, and then you don't have to do any multiplication, but that gets a little awkward for everyone. To find your carotid pulse, you find your trachea here, and you slide your fingers right into the groove on the side of your neck. And the carotid artery goes along the whole length of the neck here. So there's a variety of little points that you can find there. Again, practice checking a pulse on someone, counting for 15 or 30 seconds so that you can determine what the per minute rate is on that. Other things that we're interested in with the pulse is it regular? There are a lot of cardiac conditions that can cause your pulse to be irregular, and I want to know that. Is it weak? Like you're trying to feel it in the neck and it's like, gosh, I can hardly find this even in the neck. That's important information for us. Next slide, Jared. There we go. So let's talk about what normal looks like. Now, these are normals down in the valley where you're at a mere 4,800 foot of elevation or so for people that are used to being here. A normal respiratory rate is somewhere between 12 and 20 at rest. Now, just by virtue of going up in the mountains, this is going to increase, and a normal resting respiratory rate may be even up to 24 per minute if the person is like way up by Emerald Lake, 10,000 feet, you know, up in that area. The thing that we're looking for here is, are they breathing 24 times per minute, but they are totally fine, feeling fine, mental status is normal, they can still talk, all those kinds of things, then I'm not worried about that. But someone who normally breathes 12 times per minute, but they're up here kind of gasping at 24 times per minute, and they're not feeling good, then I'm a lot more concerned about that. Anything above 24, then I'm starting to get into the zone of concern, particularly if they have a complaint of this shortness of breath, chest pain, any of those kinds of things. Down in the valley, a resting heart rate of 60 to 80 is quite normal. Some people are a little higher than that, but this is a good time for you to figure out what your normal is. Then when you get up into high altitude, your heart has to beat a lot harder and faster in order to get more oxygen circulating. So it would be very normal for someone to be 100 or even a little bit over that at high altitude. As long as they're feeling okay, like, yeah, I'm a little tired because I'm at 10,000 feet, but they're not having chest pain or difficulty breathing, then I'm okay with a heart rate of 100 or 110. When it gets above that, especially if they're having symptoms, then that's cause for concern. Next slide. So let's go through a little mock scenario here. You can take your little paper that you were sent in advance to mark down some things, and we're going to actually do two of these. The first one, I'm going to walk you all the way through it. The second one, we're going to do a live demonstration with our fabulous patient, Andrew.
There's also a link in the live stream chat. In case you didn't get it in your email, Chris has posted that there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so let's say you're the high camp person. It's 7:20 in the morning. Any of you that have been to high camp know that we don't usually get going super fast. Like 7 o'clock in the morning, we're still just kind of rolling out of bed and thinking about whether we want oatmeal or dehydrated scrambled eggs. You know, the choice is really difficult here. And dispatch calls in and says, hey, there's a hiker in trouble near Emerald Lake. We always get the sunrise hikers that come up. They'll start at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, thinking it's a really great idea to hike all night. Most of the time they haven't slept much before they left. And so by the time they're up at high altitude, and especially if the weather's not good and it's cold and they're hungry and tired and wet, then they can get into trouble. So it was raining lightly overnight. It's cool and overcast this morning. Your team leader says, dude, I'm not ready to go. Would you please go ahead and check on this? So you throw on your medical bag, you get your radio, you got your little small bag, like hasty bag, I would say, with just an extra jacket and water. And the team leader is still putting his pants on and lacing up his boots. He's behind you a little bit, maybe a little bit slower. Okay, next slide.
You know us all too well, Heidi.
I do. I've been up here a few times. So it only takes you about 20 minutes to get from high camp to where you find the person, just below Emerald Lake. There's still a cornice of snow here, so it's chilly. I put this picture in to illustrate how snow conditions can be ever-changing and can be quite dangerous. Even like late in the summer when you don't see any snow anywhere down the valley, you can still encounter these kind of snow cornices. So this is part of your scene safety assessment. The patient's hanging out right next to this snow cornice. We might want to have them move. But she's sitting on a rock. Get there 20 minutes later. And this is an 18-year-old that got up to do the sunrise hike. She left Aspen Grove at 1 o'clock in the morning. She just arrived from California, from sea level, and her relative said, hey, this is a really cool hike. Why don't you come join us on this hike? And she was really unprepared for snow on the trail. Like, she had no idea that there could be snow on the trail at this point in the season. She's complaining of shortness of breath. She's fatigued. She's dizzy. And her companions got kind of freaked out and called 911. Jared, next slide. Okay, so as you're going through your little questionnaire, you say, hey, tell me what's going on. She says, oh, I'm just really dizzy, and I'm just really fatigued, and I'm short of breath, and really starting to feel like I'm going to throw up, you know. And the friends say, you know, we really noticed that she started to act a little funny when she got above Primrose Cirque, which is about 8,000 feet of elevation. So for someone coming from sea level, that's a really significant change. She doesn't have any medication allergies, just seasonal allergies. She does have an albuterol inhaler. She's been using it several times over the course of the day, and it just doesn't seem to be working for her anymore, is what she says here. She does have a history of asthma and anxiety. She's not on any medications for the anxiety. And she ate a little bit of water an hour or so. She really has not eaten anything in the last 6.5 hours, and she just doesn't feel like she can eat. She's nauseated and yucky. So your events leading up to the call here, that she came from sea level, didn't sleep well, she's had trouble breathing the whole time, has used the inhaler 3 times, you know, and really in this last hour or so has really started to decompensate and really is struggling with the breathing and that kind of stuff. Next slide, Jared. So you are now going to radio back to the team leader your findings, so that they can help it start getting the ball rolling on whether we need to consider evacuation via ground or via air or whatever. So you say, hey, team leader, this is Rudy, the runner. And the team leader says, go ahead, I'm still eating my scrambled eggs. You say, following this sample format, I have an 18-year-old female with confusion, difficulty breathing, nausea. She doesn't have any allergies. She does have anxiety and asthma. And she's been using her albuterol inhaler several times along the trail. Her condition's getting worse as she gets higher on the mountain. She doesn't feel like the inhaler's working, and she's only had a few sips of water in the last hour and doesn't feel like she can drink. Okay, so I want you to be thinking about what are the red flags that just kind of popped up in your head as you heard this report. Team leaders back at camp going, this doesn't sound good. Hey, thanks for the report. Can you please take her heart rate and respiratory rate for me? It sounds like we might need to evacuate her. So this is the point where you rest your hand on her back, you count her respirations, and then you would also check a pulse. You can start with a radial pulse and then this pulse. And then let's see what happens next. Next slide. So you see her seated in a tripod position. Let me scoot back so you can see what this looks. Oh, I ran into the wall. Tripod position is when people are hunched over, hands on their knees. That's a way to facilitate them being able to get more air into their lungs. So that's always a sign that things are not going so well if they're seated in a tripod position. You see that she's wearing wet clothes, she's shivering. Shivering increases the oxygen demand in your body. So if she's shivering and cold, then she needs even more oxygen than she did before. That's not a good thing. That's something that you can work on right away while you're waiting for the team leader to help get her comfortable. Mental status. You're asking her questions and she's kind of like, like you asked her, like, what time did you get up? And she's like, 1 o'clock, you know, like just not answering questions, not really communicating well, drowsy, kind of out of it, those kinds of things. She doesn't know what day it is, but she at least knows she's on the mountain and she knows her name. You count her respiratory rate and it's 28 and she seems to be gasping. She's having a hard time getting that air in. And you check her pulse rate and it's 118. The radial pulse, you try and find that and it's you can barely feel it, but it's too faint for you to be able to count it reliably. So those things are some concerning things. Next slide.
Question on
Yes.
the breathing.
Yes.
With a rate of 28, for those of us that don't know, where does that fall? Is that normal, high, low? What's
That's
that?
high.
Okay.
So we just went over that, like normal is 12 to 20. Up on the mountain, if they're not having trouble breathing just because you're at higher altitude, up to 24 may be okay. But when she's having difficulty breathing, using her inhaler, gasping, she's at 28. She's seated in a tripod position. She's kind of confused. Mental status is altered. Those are all things that we're really concerned about.
Okay.
The heart rate, again, is above, like it's 118. That's well above 110. She's been sitting on the rock. She's been resting, and she has a resting heart rate that high. So our red flags on this are that she's having trouble breathing. She's using the inhaler a bunch, and it seems to not be working anymore. That means we're getting into danger zone with asthma. Her level of consciousness has changed. That doesn't mean she's unconscious. That means that she's a little drowsy, a little confused, you know, a little just not as alert, those kinds of things. That's subtle but important to note. The inability to tolerate oral intake. We're not going to be evacuating her off the mountain on foot and in stretchers or on a horse if she can't tolerate eating or drinking anything, because this is an hours-long process. This is something that she has to be able to tolerate. Recent arrival from sea level, that's a huge red flag for me. And then the really elevated heart rate and respiratory rate. Okay, so all these are things that are red flags for me, that if I'm the team leader making the decision about this, this would spur me to call the sheriff's department back and say, this is what's going on. I would give them that sample report. I recommend that we consider air evacuation. Like, this is not something that we can hike off and hope that they get better. Next slide. So now it's time for our next little scenario. You're at the Timpanookie Trailhead. Timpanookie. I can't stand when people say that wrong, and I just said it wrong. Timpanookie Trailhead. When a call comes in and they say, hey, we've got an injured hiker at Scout Falls. Search and rescue has already been paged. They're en route. For those of you that are not familiar with the mountain, Scout Falls is about a mile and a half or so up the Timpanookie Trail. So that's a common place for people to just hike to that point and then stop. So you've been asked to head up the trail to make contact with the patient if possible while search and rescue is en route, just so we can get more information. You have your ham radio license, you have basic first aid training. Now I want you to pause for a moment and think about what kinds of things you might want to bring with you. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What things are going to be important? This is, say, in August, and maybe it's going to start getting dark in the next couple of hours. Okay. What I hope that you came up with is, I need jacket, for me and potentially for the patient. I need my first aid kit. I need some water. I need that light source. Okay, so you want to make sure you're not a liability on this. Okay, next slide. So this is before we change the scenario. Initially it was going to be a leg thing, but so ignore the picture that's inaccurate at the bottom. But you make your way up your trail, and one of the common things to do is, as you're going up the trail, it's like, hey, did you guys see this party? So as people come down, they can give you better information about where the patient actually is on the trail instead of us just kind of guessing. So you say like, hey, did you see anyone? They say, oh yeah, I think I did. It looks like the person maybe broke their ribs. So you just keep trucking. It takes you about 45 minutes to get up there. The person has been assisted back to the main trail instead of just that little spur off Scout Falls. They've gotten back to the main trail, and they're just sitting on a rock, grimacing in pain. So I'm going to have my victim come in here. Andrew, okay. Let's see, there we are. Are we both on the monitor? Go ahead. Next slide.
Can you see me grimacing?
Oh, he's grimacing. You know what? Nope, go back, sorry. Nope, give him a, okay. Hey, my name's Heidi. I'm with the TERT team. Can you tell me what your name is?
Andrew?
Okay. How old are you, Andrew?
47.
You're 47,
Yeah.
okay. Can you tell me what's going on? It looks like you're in pain.
Yeah, I was just over there, and I slipped and fell and landed on my side. My arm landed against me, and boy, it's just painful.
Okay, where are you here feeling the pain?
Well, I have a hard time breathing. If I take a breath, it just hurts. If I cough or anything, it hurts.
Okay, so you're feeling the pain more in your ribs than in your arm?
Well, my arm hurts too. I landed on it, but
Okay.
definitely hurts in my ribs.
Okay. Did you feel any popping or anything like that when you fell?
Yeah, I think there was a pop or something that happened. It all happened so fast.
Okay. So you're having some trouble breathing, you're having rib pain and arm pain. I need to ask you some other history questions so that we can determine what we need to do to get you out of here safely. Do you have any allergies to any medications or food?
No, I don't think I have any allergies. I've never had any problems.
Okay. Are you on any medications?
I take Synthroid.
Okay. So that means that you probably have hypothyroidism as a medical history. Is there anything else that we need to be aware of about your medical history?
No.
Okay.
Well, my doctor says I might be diabetic. I don't know.
Okay. When's the last time you ate?
I had a granola bar, I don't know, an hour ago maybe, and I've been drinking water today.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit more? You said you slipped and fell. Where were you on the trail when that happened?
Just right over there. It was like, just against those rocks. It was kind of a steep, and I wasn't really paying attention, and my footing slipped out, and I just landed on my right side here.
Okay. Good. Well, not good. Not good that you hurt yourself. Did you lose consciousness or feel like you hurt any other part of your body besides this part?
No, but when I landed, it felt like I didn't have any air in me. I just took a moment to get my breath back, and then when I stood up, I had a hard time, kind of disoriented, maybe a little dizzy.
A little bit dizzy?
Yeah.
Okay. How are you feeling now that it's been a little while?
Oh, okay, still just not feeling great. I definitely, every time I take a breath, it hurts, so.
Okay. Would you say the pain is sharp or dull?
Well, if I cough, it definitely is really sharp and hurts. But right now, it's just kind of dull. If I try to breathe or talk too much, it starts hurting more.
Does it radiate to any other parts of your body?
No.
Okay. On a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is no pain, 10 is you feel like your leg's getting cut off, the worst pain you could imagine. Where is it on that scale right now?
Oh, I would say a 6, maybe 7.
Okay. And this all started about an hour ago now? Is that right?
Yeah, I guess it was about an hour, yeah.
Okay. Has it gotten better or worse in that time?
Oh, I feel better. When I first fell, it was pretty bad. I feel a little bit better now, but yeah, it's just kind of, it's hard to move my arm and get comfortable.
So I'm going to cut here because we're not going to go into, what?
I didn't show that
to
them, just to you, just so you know. They haven't seen the answers yet.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you can step out of the frame. So we're not going to go into the full physical assessment on this part, but this is you gathering information. At this point, you could have Andrew see if he could raise his arm, anything he can do on his own. If he can't raise his arm at all, then you're concerned about fractures of the arm. You could do some just light palpation just to see in the rib cage if there's something that makes the pain a whole lot worse. But when you're looking at this is the basic information you should have been able to get from this,
Pull it up.
Yeah, you can go ahead and pull it up. Okay. Jared's pulling up the slide. So I put bare minimum details on here. I obviously asked the OPQRST questions in addition to this. So you could get the onset was an hour ago. The provocation was every time I breathe or try and move my arm, it hurts. The quality is this sharp pain. It's radiating a little bit in his rib cage. Severity is a 6 out of 10, and the time has been about an hour. Okay, so this is the information that you can then, as I'm just a first aid, I'm just a radio person and I don't know anything, but this is the information that you can relay back. If you're filling this in on your little cheat sheet, your little template there, this is the information you then relay back to the team leader, who's going to relay that to the sheriff's department so they can decide if they need to get a helicopter en route or those kinds of things. So from a perspective of someone that's assessing Andrew, he's saying he's having really bad pain, he's breathing okay, but he's at rest. I don't think, I suspect that if you were to have him start walking, then that would increase the pain a whole lot more and would probably not be appropriate for him to try and walk off the mountain depending on the severity of the injury. Okay, that's all I have for this first segment. We're going to open this up for a 5-minute break. If you have additional questions, please send them in, and then I'll address them really quickly before the beginning of my next presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Heidi. All right, good information for the many new members that we have this year, as well as a great review for those of us who have been around for a bit. We're going to go ahead and cut to a break for just 5 minutes. We'll kick off this timer here on the screen. You'll be able to see about when we'll go live again. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, welcome back. So I changed my masks for this portion. Also, this helps with social distancing. People kind of stay away from me. But we're going to turn the time back over to Heidi. If you had submitted any questions, we'll cover those right now, and then she'll continue with some training. So take it away.
Cool things you find in a warehouse. There's some also a panda mask and some other things. I've refrained from jumping into those. But we're going to cover what I call urgent care on the mountain. The vast majority of the things that you're going to encounter on the mountain are things that can be handled with common sense. But I want to give you some of those common sense tools. Like we do have those dramatic helicopter rescues and stuff, but I would say for every one helicopter rescue, you have 100 blisters and scrapes and people that are just a little sick, you know, altitude sick, those kinds of things. So we're going to cover some of those simple things because that's what you're really going to encounter the most. Next slide, Jared. So, Life Flight. This was from, I think, 2 seasons ago. It's a very quick way to get off the mountain-ish, quick being relative. This particular rescue, they had to bring 2 choppers because the first one didn't have the hoist and blah, blah, blah. But it's very expensive to get off the mountain, so we're trying to avoid that for people. The whole point of TERT is to keep small things small. Next slide. This is a list of some things that I carry in my own pack, useful things. You don't have to have all of them, but when you're looking at what is the best way that I can carry some things that will be useful and have more than one purpose. Obviously, you should be carrying gloves, and now I would even submit that you might want to consider carrying a mask with you, because if you're going to have someone with breathing difficulty on the mountain, you're going to be spending a long time with this person, you want to keep yourself safe, tuck a little surgical mask into your bag as well. Quart freezer bags are multi-purpose. This can be used as an additional glove. If you run out of gloves, you can just slip your hand in there and you're trying to put pressure on something. It's garbage disposal. It's a way to fill up with water to do wound irrigation. There's a lot of different uses for that. Just a generally useful sort of thing to have. Non-stick gauze pads, because there's literally nothing worse than picking strings from the woven 4x4s out of a nasty abrasion. So non-stick gauze pads are great. Coban is that stuff that sticks to itself and not to you, that if you've ever had your blood drawn, they use that to wrap around your arm. You can get it for cheaper at IFA or some of the other ranch supply stores under the label of Vet Wrap. Same stuff. But that's a really useful thing to have, because better than regular old gauze that you might use to wrap a bad wound down, like a roller gauze in the valley, you need to have this be a bandage that's going to hold up to the conditions of hiking down the trail in dirt and mud and snow and water and all those things. So the Coban keeps an abrasion or some other similar kind of a injury cleaner and drier for longer. Instead of carrying roller gauze, I bring ACE wraps because those are both supportive and absorbent, plus they also can help keep a dressing on. So they can be used for more purposes than just the roller gauze can. Neosporin to slather on there. Neosporin can be used for lubricant when you have hot spots, for chapstick in a worst case scenario, but also helps keep a wound from getting infected while someone's hiking out. Band-aids are multi-purpose, obviously. Again, blister prevention and also dressing minor things. Safety pins can be used for impromptu slings, like if someone has an injured arm and you don't have anything else to support their arm with, you can simply take their shirt and flip it up, and I'm not going to do that because I have it nicely tucked in right now, but flip their shirt up and you can safety pin across the top there, and you now have a self-contained sling. So Band-aids or safety pins are multi-purpose. I always carry electrolyte replacement capsules with me, or tablets that can be dropped in someone's water bottle that are effervescent and they fizz and dissolve that way. That's one of the things I would say I've given away the most of in all my years in hiking and also being a TERT member, are electrolyte replacements, and we'll go into that in more detail a little later on. It's also really helpful to carry those basic comfort medications, Tylenol, ibuprofen, Pepto. A lot of times people get stomach upset on the trail, or Benadryl in case of an allergic reaction. I carry a Sawyer straw filter. Those are inexpensive. They're somewhere around 20 bucks. They're lightweight. They're about this big. You fill a bag, hook it into the Sawyer straw, and squeeze it. And so this is a cheap, very accessible, very easy to use filtration system that you should always have on you. And I keep that in my hiking day pack all the time. I also have a small tarp that folds up about this big, maybe an inch thick, about this big. That tarp can be shelter, it can be protection against the wind or rain or other elements, it can be a place for a patient to sit, it can also be used in splinting. So when you're looking at useful stuff to carry, that's high on my list. Those of you that have seen this training before will recognize the pictures that I posted in here. The pictures on this slide are from a time when I was up at Bloomington Lake, just by Bear Lake. It's about 45 minutes or so up a long dirt road to get up to this lake. People like to go there and jump off of a rope swing into the lake. And when we arrived that time, someone said, that guy's knee is hurt real bad. And he had actually ruptured his patellar tendon. So the patella, the kneecap, was just kind of free floating, and his knee was really, really unstable. Not something that he could hike out with. They had tried to make a splint for him out of the belts and the stick and the towels that you see, but he still had a lot of play in his knee and couldn't tolerate putting weight on it. So we jerry-rigged a splint with some ACE bandages, using the towel to pad in the gaps there. I had one thing of roller gauze because I didn't have enough ACE wrap to go all the way up, and trekking poles. And with assistance, this guy was able to actually hike himself all the way back out to the cars, which was huge because we were far away from communication. It was Raspberry Days weekend up there, so I'm sure all the emergency services were already tapped out. So it was really awesome that with the help of people and materials that we were able to gather, that we were able to help him get out on his, not on his own power, with assistance, but he was able to get out without needing search and rescue to come up. Next slide, Jared.
It's up to you. Do you want all
Next slide.
Heidi, do you want all the questions held
Yeah.
till the end?
Why don't we take any pertinent questions for right now on this slide?
Do you have any, Chris?
Someone wants to know, what is your electrolyte
Replacement.
of choice?
Okay, so I will be covering that a little bit later on in the dehydration slide. So stay tuned for that. That's a great question. Okay, so let's talk about just some things you might see on the mountain. This is a shot of Emerald Lake from last summer. It was really beautiful, stunning with the rocks showing through. I just love it. Anytime I go back through my TERT pictures, it just makes me antsy to get back up there. Common stuff that you're going to see up here are blisters. Obviously, people are hiking. They don't necessarily have the best footwear, socks, those kinds of things. Abrasions and cuts are really common as people slip on the trail, as people slide down the glacier and get massive abrasions on their fannies and also on their forearms because they'll be trying to brake with their arms. Concussions I've seen a few times on the mountain when I've been just up there hiking, but also as a team member. Asthma problems definitely can be made worse by the change in the weather. So either cold or hot temperatures, altitude, all those kinds of things. Lots of stomach problems because that's one of those things that comes with high altitude. And also with people eating weird things like lots and lots of beef jerky and dried fruit and stuff that they're not accustomed to. Muscle cramps, super common. Fracture, sprains, strains, dehydration is huge, and then psychiatric problems are a really significant thing that even if someone's generally pretty okay down in the valley, maybe they have baseline anxiety that's well controlled, you get them up at high altitude where they're not getting as much oxygen and they're tired and they're wet and they're cold and they're hungry, and that can blow up. So that's what we're gonna cover that a little bit as well. Next slide. So main thing on blisters is prevention, and it's nice for the trailhead people to kind of educate people as they're coming up and say, hey, I noticed that you're wearing flip-flops. You're probably going to wind up with some problems from that. You might want to consider changing your footwear or maybe not trying to go to the summit in that. So that's some prevention for you right there. For myself, one of my favorite ways to keep from getting blisters on the back of my heel, because even though I hike a lot, when I'm carrying a pack, the additional load of 30 or 40 pounds on my back, then I tend to get more hot spots and trouble spots that I wouldn't ordinarily when I'm hiking with a lighter load. So I like to use the synthetic, the KT tape. They have a cotton KT tape and they have a synthetic one that's slicker. It comes in pre-cut strips. I take those strips and I cut them in half and then in half again, and I just take that little stretchy piece of tape and smooth it to my heel so that it extends from the whole length of my heel up to the base of the Achilles tendon where my shoe covers, and rub that on with some good friction and smooth that on. And ever since I started doing that, I actually learned that from Andrew, I have not had any heel blisters since. That was after I had one really horrific, like quarter size full thickness blister on a hike up, and you never want to do that again. So you can also use things like Body Glide, which you can also just go cheap and use Vaseline, or if you have nothing else in your pocket, use chapstick. Rub that on your heel. That just helps keep the friction down on the back of your heel. Some people use duct tape. I feel like that's kind of hard on your skin because it's not breathable at all, which is why I personally prefer the KT tape. You also have Tegaderm, which is that thin, clear plastic film that they'll use in the hospital to put over your IV site. You can put one of those around your heel, making sure that you don't have any wrinkles or crinkles in it, and that's another thing that can provide that barrier. The big thing is that educating people that if they're starting to feel a hot spot, they need to stop. And take their shoes off and evaluate it and clean things up, change their socks, put a barrier on, whatever it takes, because left alone, that's going to become misery when they have to hike out later. There are a number of nice products on the market. Band-Aid has a blister-specific dressing that's quite nice. The catch with all of these is that it has to be applied on really clean and dry skin. So this is where using some of your water to wash things off really well will help, because if you stick that on dirty skin, it's just going to fall right off. If you're going to do moleskin or mole foam, cut a little donut so that it's cushioning around the blister, not putting additional pressure on top of that. And then you can, if you want, put an additional layer of moleskin on top of that to protect it from further friction. But the idea is to cradle that blister. You really want to avoid rupturing them unless they're so big that like it's hard for the person to fit their shoe on, those kinds of things, because blisters really act as a natural Band-Aid. It's protecting that skin underneath so that it can heal. And so as long as you can leave it intact, that's the best. Next slide, Jared. Abrasions and cuts. This is a picture from an actual person up at Emerald Lake. One of the times we're up there. They're really common to see people develop these kind of scrapes and stuff when they're trying to go down the glacier, or even if they just slip on the trail. I've seen some really spectacular ones, like the entire length of someone's leg from their butt cheek all the way down to the bottom, like torn straight through their clothing. So you have to get a little bit creative when people have their entire leg scraped up. This is not just like a little throw a Band-Aid on it. You have to first off wash it and figure out where the actual scrape is, because this leg is all bloody and gnarly looking. The actual area of the scrape is much smaller than what you see on the blood there. Ideally, you're going to use filtered water for this, just a lot of it. If you have you can either pour it out of a bottle or you can put it in a bag, cut a little hole in the bag and squeeze, so you have kind of like this high pressure irrigation thing going on. You could use a hydration pack, but you would want to clean the nozzle first. Remember, this is not ideal scenario in a clinic where you're using sterile saline. This is the mountains, so we do the best we can with what we have. You really, really want to avoid using straight betadine, alcohol, or hydrogen peroxide on these cuts. That actually destroys the tissue. So the caveat to that is if you have water that you're not super sure if it's sanitary, then I'll drop a single betadine wipe into the water to make it just very, very, very dilute, kind of kill the germs. But you never want to pour straight alcohol or hydrogen peroxide on abrasion. You wind up, it'll foam nicely, the peroxide will, and that's because it's killing all sorts of healthy tissue. So just lots and lots of water. You put a dressing on it, Neosporin, and then your nonstick Coban, or your nonstick pad, and then your Coban or your ACE wrap, or whatever it takes to kind of keep that in place. When does someone need sutures? That's always the golden question. First off, even though I can do sutures, I'm not going to suture anyone on the mountain, because that's closing a wound that's potentially very dirty. We don't have a way to clean it really well up there on the mountain. If someone has a gaping wound, and especially if it's like, say, on the bend of their thumb, and every time they bend their thumb, it pops open, you see stuff underneath, that's something that's going to need sutures. Our job on the mountain is to wash it well, bandage it well, and get them off the mountain so they can go and get that taken care of in a place where it's much cleaner. So just when someone looks at you and says, oh no, does it need sutures? Err on the side of go to the urgent care when you get back down, and they'll tell you and take care of it. Let's talk about concussions. I was hiking up on Timp a couple years ago with some friends of mine, and we'll have a scenario about this later, and a guy got whacked in the head with a rock and was like kind of blowing it off. Concussions are something that I'm passionate about. This is what I did my doctoral project on. The problem with concussions is that the symptoms are not immediately obvious. Someone can take a blow to the head and they're kind of dazed for a second, and then they're like, no, I think I'm okay, I'm shaking it off. Concussions are a lactic acid injury on the cellular level. So that means think of it as an injury to your brain, like what happens when you lift weights, like you go to a weightlifting class and you're like, wow, I'm going to really feel this tomorrow. You know, I'm a little bit sore today, but it's not too bad. And then the next day you wake up and you need assistance to get out of your bed and to help you onto the toilet because you're so sore. You know, the same thing happens in your brain. So initially you may not have a ton of symptoms, but if someone got knocked in the head by a falling rock, or they fell and cracked their head on the way down, you need to have this in your zone of concern. You want to know what happened with the injury. Did they lose consciousness at the time, or were they even just a little bit dazed? How were they acting right after the injury? And did they initially act kind of dazed, but now they're okay? Or have those symptoms gotten worse over time? And you want to know if they've had a previous concussion, because anyone who's had a concussion before is at much greater risk for a worse injury the second time, even if it's a pretty minor blow, something that you don't think would hurt other people. Common symptoms with a concussion are headaches, dizziness, nausea. Okay, those are three things that also overlap with high altitude sickness. So this is where you have to do a little bit of digging to figure out what's what. Regardless if they have those symptoms, I'm concerned. Poor memory, vision changes, confusion or irritability. Again, those can come with altitude sickness. Poor balance, sleepiness, sensitivity to light and sound. And the key here is that those symptoms are going to evolve over time. So if they fell and hit their head somewhere on the trail and then they kept hiking and they're in this environment where they're not getting enough oxygen and things are worse and worse, then you're really concerned about the outcome, not just in that moment, but 2 days, 3 days down the road. Next slide. So warning signs, if someone exhibits any of these signs, that is cause for immediate evacuation. People tend to get really fixated on pupils. The reality is that it's very rare that you're going to see one pupil bigger than another. Like, I've been a nurse and I've been in medicine a long time, and I'd say I've had a very, very small handful of patients in my entire career that have exhibited this symptom, and it was alarming. So don't get super fixated like, oh, their pupils look fine, so I guess they're okay. No, that doesn't mean that they're okay. But if they are super drowsy or having a hard time waking them up, they have this headache that's just getting worse and worse and worse and won't go away. If there's any changes like the slurred speech or weakness, or they're dizzy and they can't keep their balance, if they have repeated vomiting, especially if it's like really forceful vomiting, if they're having a seizure or really unusual behavior, confusion, restlessness, agitation, if they lost consciousness for any duration, those are all cause for an immediate evacuation. That's a life flight evacuation. That's not a let's sit up here and just kind of wait and see what happens. Next slide. So for someone who got a minor bump on their head and they're like, I have a little headache, yeah, I'm a little bit dizzy, but they're still alert and conversant and all those things, then you may be able to get them hydrated and have them walk off the mountain with supervision. No, this is not ideal. In Valley land, where we're down here, if a kid gets a hit in the head during a sports game, I'm going to sideline them immediately, and for 24 hours, they've got to lay low while we see if any symptoms show up, just out of a precaution. But in the mountains, it's a little bit more challenging. So if they have really mild symptoms and didn't really have that severe of an injury, then you hydrate them and you get them off the mountain and recommend that they go to urgent care to be evaluated and that they need a rest for up to 48 or 72 hours, physical and cognitive rest. So that means no screens, no reading, those kinds of things. Anyone that you're concerned about, you should really recommend that they see their healthcare provider when they get off the mountain. Next slide. Let's talk about asthma. Asthma, I mean, everyone feels short of breath when you're up at 10,000 feet. Everyone has a hard time catching their breath. The difference between just the normal high altitude difficulty breathing and an asthma attack is that there's three components to asthma that are really troublesome. First, there's airway constriction, meaning the airway pipes tend to clamp down. They narrow. And that's called a bronchospasm. So they spasm, they clamp down, you can't get air through as easily. The next problem is inflammation. So the wall of their air tubes, instead of being nice and thin like this, gets all thick. And so it doesn't flex as easily as it does before. And that also narrows the air passage. And the third problem is production of mucus. That's an inflammatory response. Like, hey, I sense inflammation, let me make more boogers, because that's really helpful. I don't know where that comes from, but it's a protective mechanism here. These asthma attacks, like someone could have just really mild intermittent asthma and they're really fine and they hardly ever take their inhaler ever down in the valley, but you get them up at altitude where the air's thinner and they have to work harder to breathe and it's cold, and that can trigger an asthma attack. So initially you may hear them wheezing as they're working, and that's because those airways are narrowing, so the air doesn't flow through as smoothly as it normally does. But if you see them progressing to the point where they're very quiet with their breathing and you can no longer hear them wheezing, that's actually really terrifying. That means they're not moving air anymore, and that's a crisis. So you want to assess their history. You want a full set of vitals, and so when the medical people are up there, it's useful to have oxygen saturations, heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, all those kinds of things. Put them in a position of comfort, which is often that tripod position again, where they can breathe deeper and kind of open their airway. If they have an inhaler, you can assist them with administering it, and take advice from medical control. When this is a crisis situation, then I would sometimes direct the medical people to administer more doses of the inhaler than we normally would use, because we're trying to keep this person breathing long enough to get them off the mountain, okay? Different things, different circumstances cause for different measures. You definitely want to keep them warm, because cold air is one of those things that contributes to bronchospasms. So you warm them up with blankets, make sure you get wet clothing off, those kinds of things, and then call for evacuation if they're not improving within 10 minutes or so of administering this inhaler. Next slide. This is a fine shot of the potty that's up the Timpaniki side. I can't decide which of the two rooms with a view are more rustic. The one up by the lake is listing badly. Like, you have to sit on it very cautiously, because the whole thing, you're at about a 20-degree angle there, so you have to use with caution. There's a lot of reasons why people develop digestive disturbances, as I've alluded to already. Anytime you're at high altitude for a prolonged amount of time, you're breathing more heavily, losing more water, you're at risk for dehydration, and depending on what people are eating and drinking along the trail, their electrolyte balance can get really out of whack. Also, if they're eating food that they don't normally eat, like normally I don't eat a whole bunch of beef jerky and trail mix, and so if you suddenly go up on the trail and that's what you're eating, and you maybe don't have enough water to kind of counterbalance the dehydrated food, then you can get a really bad tummy ache from that. It also comes just with the rise in altitude. You can get more bloating and stuff there, and some people react to that with constipation, other people with diarrhea. Whatever the case is, this is a common problem along the trail. One of the great points of discussion over the years has been if it's appropriate for us to continue to allow these toilets to be in place on the mountain. My personal feeling from a public health perspective is yes, we need somewhere to kind of consolidate the poop, because people have to go anyway, but it's fairly gross and somewhat hazardous. So there are a limited number of reasonable potty spots on the trail is the short answer there. You definitely, when someone's having these digestive disturbances, recognize that most of the time, like especially if they have a lot of bloating and just kind of abdominal pain, that's going to get better if you can help them get further down the trail, back down into more normal altitude. You definitely want to help them with hydration. If they've been drinking just straight water and not eating much in the way of salty foods, then you can help them with electrolyte supplement. You might consider Pepto-Bismol or Imodium or something like that if it's available, if they're having a lot of upset there. I know that in our packs, our med packs up high, we do have a generic form of Pepto and also Tums and I think Imodium as well. So you have a few options there, and this is where you consult with your medical person about which one you would choose. You would consider evacuation if someone can't walk because the severity of their symptoms. Like if they're completely vomiting and diarrhea and can't even stand up, that's a reason for evacuation. Your average person with a little bit of stomach upset, you can usually just help them with food and water and electrolytes and rest and give them some time for their digestive systems to kind of settle down, and then they can walk off the trail or help themselves off the trail with assistance. Next slide. Muscle cramps. This is another thing that I see commonly, especially on hot days or when people have been hiking all day long and it's been a really long time since they've ever done something of this duration. Plus, it's brutal to hike up the mountain and then right back down if your legs are not really conditioned to that. You do need some additional assistance with electrolytes. When you get imbalances of your potassium, of your calcium, magnesium, any of those things, it can trigger really tight, like tense muscles where you feel like they're so tight that you don't have the control over how they function, and that's a very scary position to be in. This can be absolutely debilitating and something that can at times warrant an evacuation, but this is where we as team members can do some simple interventions, sit with them for a little while, help them rest, hydrate, have some supplements there, and see if it gets better to the point where they can walk themselves out. This is also a great, if someone has really severe leg cramps, having trekking poles that you can loan them can also be really, really of great assistance, because people will lose strength or ability to control their quads, and it's terrifying to try and go down the hill if you feel like you can't trust your legs. So I put on here just a few. There's a lot of options out here. These are just a few that I have used and recommend. Tailwind is a mix that's kind of like Gatorade, but it doesn't have all the weird artificial colors and things in it. It's made by some trail runners out of Colorado, out of Leadville, Colorado. And this is something that you can have and just dump into their water and let them sip at it. It does have some sugar in it, so if they need a little bit of sugar boost to help them get down the trail, that's good. I like the Hammer brand nutrition products. That's those middle two. We have the Fizz, which is a effervescent tablet that you drop into their water, or we have just the capsules. There's Endurolites, and there's also Endurolites Extreme. And I've been known, I once encountered a guy that was at the edge of Primrose Cirque and just couldn't even figure out how to get down those last few rocks so that he could get back onto the long part of the Heber switchback to make it down the trail. And then his legs were just quivering. You could see his muscles like quivering and twitching below his skin. And I actually just opened some of these capsules and just dumped them right on his tongue, which tastes terrible, by the way. It's really salty and weird. But did that and had him drink some water, and within about 10-15 minutes, the twitching and cramping was starting to calm down, and he was able to eventually hike down under his own power. So that was a success story. But most of the time people can just swallow those capsules. I carry a lot of the capsules because it's small and it's easy to share. Noon is another common brand that you can even find often at like grocery stores. I've seen them at Harmon's, at Smith's, some Smith's. You can definitely find them online, but try a few, see what you like. It's a useful thing if you know that you're going hiking for a while. Take some before you go. And when I'm hiking up the mountain with my pack on and I know that I'm really exerting, then I'll take a couple of these every hour or so to keep myself from getting into a point of crisis. You can tell when you're losing electrolytes because you'll develop this salty crust, around your neck and your shirt and those kinds of things. That's all lost minerals, and you need to replace that. Next slide. Dehydration. This is a picture from last season. My daughter helping one of our team members pump water. We'll go and fill the big jug in the lake and then filter water out of that for people. There are days where you can just pump gallons and gallons and gallons of water for people because they really underestimate how long it's going to take them to go up that mountain and how quickly they're going to lose their water. I think all of us that have been on the team long enough have encountered people that I remember many, many years ago, we encountered a group of guys with a loaf of white bread tied to their little loop on their belt and a backpack full of beer. Yeah, woo! So if people use caffeinated beverages, that actually makes them lose water faster. That acts as a diuretic. The weather conditions can change so much. You breathe more out as you're hiking, and we're going to cover, I think Mike's going to cover more about high altitude sickness and stuff, but just recognize that you need a lot more water on the trail than you think you do. Symptoms like this can include thirst, but that's a really late sign. People need to be drinking before that. Fatigue, cramps, weakness, like this confusion, the irritability. Someone starts acting real crabby on the trail, it's time to stop and have a snack and have a drink. And you may also really see that elevated heart rate and low blood pressure, which would be something that the medical people would assess. You also want to ask them if they've peed at all since they've been on the trail. If they've been hiking for 8 or 10 hours and they haven't peed yet, that's actually a really big problem. You want to rehydrate gradually. This is not the chug, chug, chug down a liter and sit there. You want to have them sip at stuff to make sure it doesn't upset their stomach. Add the electrolytes in there and then just rest with them as their cells shift all those fluids and electrolytes in and out until they're ready to hike back down again. Next slide, Jared. I mentioned before that psychological problems can be really problematic on the mountain, and this is something that we've seen several times, where someone with a relatively minor injury or a little bit of asthma gets grossly magnified by their underlying mental health condition that's much worse when they're tired and hungry in their altitude. Someone having an anxiety attack can look the same as someone who's having an asthma attack or some sort of a heart problem, because when they're having an anxiety attack, they're flooded with these chemicals, norepinephrine and cortisol, these stress hormones that cause real physiologic changes in their body, that cause their heart rate to shoot up. They have this chest tightness and pain and feel like they can't breathe because their airways are constricting. Okay, so this is not like they're just faking it, they're just a little anxious, they need to calm down. They're having a real physiologic response here that causes very distressing physical symptoms. They can also have a lot of GI upset because there's more serotonin receptors in your gut than there are in your head. So when someone's feeling really agitated, it's common for them to either have cramps or diarrhea or constipation, because that's super helpful when you're anxious to feel like you need to poop your pants. I don't know who decided that was a great evolutionary trait. So this obviously is compounded when someone has been up all night because they're trying to hike to the sunrise, or they're really tired and not really well conditioned for this, or if their brain's a little bit dehydrated and not functioning on all cylinders. So when someone's feeling really anxious in this setting, because anyone's going to feel anxious if they're injured or hurt or those kinds of things, but when someone has a baseline anxiety disorder, or you sense that there's some additional kind of components to this that's psychological, the next slide is going to walk you through some things that you can do to help calm someone down. And this is useful for any person, whether they have an anxiety disorder or not. If they're stressed about the situation they're in, this is really useful. So one of the things you can do immediately to help them with what we call grounding, which is a way to help them get back in touch with their surroundings, realize that they're in a safe spot, there's people around them to help, is to have them do belly breathing. And that means putting your hand on your chest and on your belly, taking a deep breath, filling your belly and your chest up with air, and then blowing out. And so this is this very intentional breathing pattern, getting them to breathe deep enough that they can actually pause and get some of that oxygen to exchange. So you have them do belly breathing 3 or 4 times in a row. You coach them through this. We're going to breathe in slowly. This is a 5-second inhale. We're going to exhale over 5 seconds. This is a way to help coach them and help them actually physically feel themselves slowing down their breathing. You can also have them do what we call a sensory reset, where you say, hey, let's focus on some things that all of your 5 senses can feel. So this is something you can see. What can you see right now? You can see this rock that you're sitting on. What can you hear? You can hear the people around me. I can hear a bird. I can hear the water running nearby. What can you smell? I can smell the fresh mountain air. What can you touch? You can physically touch yourself or touch the surroundings to know that you're in a stable, secure place and you're not going to be hurt further. Another key phrase is, this is really scary, and we're here with you. We're not going to leave you alone, and we're going to stay with you until we get you off this mountain. Your vital signs are stable. We're going to get through this together. So you need to acknowledge that this is a scary circumstance for them, but they're not alone in this, and there is an end to it. Like, this is going to take a little while for us to get you off the mountain, but we're going to keep you warm and as safe as possible. We've got the tools to do that. If you have your phone with you on the mountain, there's a couple of apps that you can download in advance that are helpful. One is called Binaural Beats, and this is one where you can plug the headphones into their ears and they can hear a tone that beats back and forth, alternating sides, and this is one way to get the brain kind of reset and get both sides of the brain working together. There's also apps like Calm and Headspace and Aura. If you're going to be with this person for a long time, you can throw the headphones on, let them listen to some calming music or some meditation things, and this may help them feel like they have a little more control over the situation. So the basic point here is common sense patient care. If they're wet, you get them dry. If they're cold, you warm them up. If they're too hot, you cool them down. This is not rocket science. This is just, what does it take to get this person comfortable and in a position where they're going to be able to maintain their body temperature appropriately for up to potentially hours while we evacuate them out. Make sure they're well hydrated with electrolyte replacement. You'd be amazed how many times people improve substantially with hydration and with adequate attention to some nutrition and comfort. Talk to them reassuringly. This is not the time to be like, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. Ugh, this is really bad. If you feel like you need to express those thoughts, please split off and go do that over in the corner away from where the patient can hear. We don't normally in emergency medical situations say to give people over-the-counter medications, but when you're on the mountain and you're looking at hours of being up there with them, it may be appropriate. I had a patient several years ago that really severely injured her tailbone going down the glacier. Like, it took her about an hour to inch her way down the glacier with assistance, could hardly walk. She was soaking wet, she was freezing. This was a situation where we considered evacuation, but it wasn't life-threatening, so they couldn't call a helicopter. Coming down on horseback down the Timpaniki side would have been absolutely flat-out awful with a broken tailbone. And hiking out felt impossible initially. We were with her for about 2 or 3 hours, getting her warm in dry clothes. We stuck her inside a sleeping bag and hats and gloves and all the things and gave her warm liquids. And we gave her all the Tylenol and ibuprofen that she could safely have with the over-the-counter doses. So 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol and 800 of ibuprofen. And once all that kicked in and she warmed up and stopped shivering, because that muscle tension makes all those injuries so much worse, she was actually able to hike off the mountain with her party. We gave her an FRS radio to carry down to keep in touch with us on the way down and loaned her some trekking poles. So that's the exact kind of success story that we're looking for, is helping people be able to get off the mountain under their own power with just some basic interventions here. You need to obviously monitor them frequently, because someone that has seemed to be okay can go downhill if they start to go into shock. And so you don't just assess them once. This sample history or this OPQ or ST assessment that we talked about, you go back and do that again. How's your pain now? Is it radiating somewhere new now? You don't have to go through the whole thing. You already know what happened initially and those kinds of things, but you need to keep reassessing. Check the heart rate again. Check the breathing rate again. Were they breathing 20 times per minute and now we're up to 28 and we've been sitting here? That means that things are getting worse and it's time to consider a more urgent evacuation off the mountain. Next slide. This is a picture from a couple years ago. The bald lifelike guy is a good friend of mine, a colleague of mine, a nurse practitioner now. This was right as we were finishing school, so I guess this was 3 years ago. This was a fine example of a person who was doing the sunrise hike. They got completely cliffed out and off the trail in the Timpanogos Basin, in those cliff bands that are below the connector trail that goes from the lake up to the saddle. And had asthma and were tired and cold and anxiety and all these things. And we wound up, that was the slide from earlier that showed the person on the hoist. That was this patient. She was hoisted off the mountain. And you can see that, you can't even see the patient. They're buried under a pile of people and blankets and all those things. And later we sent someone to the hospital to collect all the various things that we had loaned to keep this person warm and stuff.
That guy's a backstop.
Yeah. So the person in the pink sweatshirt there is just propping the patient up to keep them seated because the patient didn't feel like they could keep themselves upright. So the end result, and there's Andrew in his kilt. Yes, Andrew would like me to point that out. The end result of this one was that the patient was treated in the emergency room with some fluids and then ultimately released just a few hours later. This was a situation where anxiety and asthma and dehydration and altitude sickness combined to create the perfect storm. And maybe if we had been in a position to keep the patient warmer and get them really calm down and stuff, may have potentially been able to get them off the mountain otherwise, but in this case, when someone's having trouble breathing, we wound up evacuating them via life flight. So something that seems pretty innocuous down in the valley can become a real crisis when you're at 10,000 or 11,000 feet. Jared, next slide. So I want you to run through a couple of these scenarios. We're just going to talk through them. You can take notes on this. You can practice using your sample history forms again. These are all scenarios of actual people that I've treated. You have a 42-year-old chubby guy that decides to go down the glacier because that's the easier way to go down, or so people think. Like, this seems like a good idea. I'm tired of hiking. I'm just going to slide down this. He has a bottle of Mountain Dew. So we're concerned about dehydration because he's been just fueling up just with caffeinated sugar water there that makes you more dehydrated. In the end, it's a diuretic. And then while he's going down, he gets an abrasion from his butt all the way down to his knee. He's really tired. He's not thinking very clearly. When you look at these vital signs, his blood pressure's okay. Not terrible, 138 over 84. And for someone that's in stress or in pain, I'm actually okay with that. You know, the normal kind of parameter for blood pressure is 140 over 90 or less. Heart rate's a little elevated, not terrible. He's up at 10,000 feet, I'm okay with that. Respiratory rate is 20. Again, he's at 10,000 feet, I'm okay with that. Oxygen saturations are on the low side, but that's expected at 10,000 feet. One of the fun things we do as team members when we're bored at camp is see what everyone's baseline oxygen saturations are up at camp. So you just kind of have an idea of what's normal for you when you're at 10,000 feet. So in this kind of a situation, what do you think you need to do? Is this something that warrants an evacuation? Is it something that you need to get life flight for? I would say no. I would say this is a person that's tired and dehydrated and they have a sore butt. And we can help them with bandaging their fanny, maybe loan them a pair of pants or something to help them get off the mountain, loan them trekking poles and an FRS radio, sit and wait with them and help them get hydrated and warm and give them some Tylenol and some ibuprofen. And he's going to be fine. His vital signs are fine. They're stable. He just didn't make good life choices. Next slide. Jared and his technical difficulties. Okay, the next one, this is another one that I encountered when I was hiking. I can't remember if it was with my girls or with a couple of friends of mine, but this 19-year-old guy, there was a group of guys and girls that were on a date and they were hiking, and this was fairly early in the season. There was snow in several sections of the trail, quite low down, like by 2 miles up the trail, you're encountering patches of snow. We saw this guy and he had gotten clipped by a rock and he had this scrape on his forehead that looked fairly innocuous. He said he didn't lose consciousness. You know, I just can never leave well enough alone. When I see an injury or someone sitting on the side of the trail, I always check on him. It's like my civic duty or something. So, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And he's like, oh, rock fell down and kind of clipped me. Oh, did you lose consciousness? No, I'm fine. I'm so cool. I don't want to, we're going to go to the summit. And of course, none of them had any of the spikes or anything that needed to safely do that. But it was like, okay. He brushed it off. We rested for a little bit. They rested for a little bit. We encountered him again an hour later. And this time he's sitting on the side of the trail on a log, kind of droopy looking and really like grasping his tummy and feeling yucky, and says the light's really bothering his eyes. I made up vitals here. I didn't have a blood pressure cuff with me, but I was able to assess his heart rate and respiratory rate and saturations. And in this case, he had continued to go up the trail even though he had a concussion. He was okay. Like, we sat with him, hydrated him, gave him some electrolytes. and then encouraged him to go back down the trail. This was a situation where the team was not up on the mountain, and so I didn't have anyone to radio to or anything, and Timpaniki does not have cell service, or has not in the past. It might be this year. They're bringing towers up, so we might actually have a little bit of cell coverage up there. But the point here was that he really didn't recognize the severity of his injury, and he did sustain a concussion. And so we checked in with him another time or two on the way back down the trail, helped him get hydrated, gave him some Tylenol, and advised him to go down. But the main point was that I was able to convince him it's time to turn back. This is not a day to do the summit. You have probably gotten a mild concussion, and you need to get off the mountain as quickly as you possibly can. Next slide. This is the end of my presentation. These are pictures of me and my youngest daughter. She's my faithful trail buddy right now. She enjoys coming up with me. So I hope that you've learned something from this. I'm going to let, are there any questions that have come through, Chris, that I need to address before we move on? Okay. If you have additional questions, I'll be hanging around here at the studio. If there's things that I need to address a little bit later on, go ahead and send them in, and we can take a couple minutes later if there's something that needs to be addressed. Jared, back to you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Heidi. All right. We're going to introduce our next speaker here. Give me about 10 seconds. All right. Just had some last minute things to set up here. Okay. All right. You should be able to see me and Mike Nielson, our next presenter. Hi, Mike.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for joining us. I'm going to introduce Mike real quick. So Mike joined TERT in 1989 because he wanted to learn to use amateur radio, starting out with a first responder course, and then he subsequently completed his EMT. He's been a CPR instructor for over 30 years, a wilderness first aid instructor for 10 years. He was employed in the cardiac cath lab for 3 years and has volunteered several years in the ER. He recently retired after 12 years as a medical librarian, aiding doctors, nurses, and pathologists in their various research needs. He's also been active in scouting for 62 years and was awarded the Silver Beaver. He's an experienced commercial photographer with 35 years experience, ranging from magazines and brochures to media production and product photography. With that, I'd like to welcome Mike Nielson, and I'm going to make sure, I think your audio is on, so you're good to go, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay, I apologize for technical difficulties on my end.
No worries, nobody else saw, just me. Go ahead, you're live.
Sorry to impose that on you.
No worries.
Okay, I want to start with Exhibit A, French fried onion rings. And you're probably wondering how that applies to altitude, but there are two ways. One, notice how the lid is bulging on this. I'm sure you've seen that at the store, Pringles and lots of different containers. But the lid is bulging because this was canned at sea level and then brought up to the level here. And since there's a difference in pressure, this is bulging at this altitude. Okay, Jared, if you have the altitude, you have altitude.
I'll get that up. Go ahead and start talking about it. It'll take me just a second here, but go ahead and dive into it.
Okay, I'm a certified scuba diver. Haven't done a ton of dives because I was never rich enough, but
Hey, Mike, hang on just 1 second. I think we lost your audio for some reason on our side. Just a moment there.
Technology.
Okay, I think we've got you back right there, Mike. Go ahead. I might not be able to show your... I'll be working on it. In the meantime, we're just going to be showing you, but we may lose your visualizations. So go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm not sure that's going to show. Okay, sea level. You have this sac of air that goes from your hand into the troposphere, and that stack 1 inch by 1 inch weighs 14.7 pounds, so not very heavy. When you go in the ocean, if you went to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is 36,000 feet down, you could drop Everest in there and it would disappear. It's 16,000 pounds per square inch, so that would be like having 8 tons on a quarter on your chest. I think it would penetrate pretty fast. Interestingly enough, at sea level, water boils at 212 degrees. Because of the cap of air pressure on that, it has to get to 212 to release that. As you go higher, Provo's 4,600 feet, so the pressure is 12.5 psi. Top of temp is 9.54 psi, so quite a drop already. And water boils on the top of temp at 190 degrees. So the wilderness guidebooks that say boil your water for so long to kill Giardia, you go, okay, is that boil at 212 or is that boil at 190 degrees? I haven't seen any research on that. Top of Everest, 4.5 psi, and water boils at 157 degrees.
Okay, just a heads up. I think I got your visualizations back, Mike, with audio. So go ahead and continue.
You're amazing. I wish I could see what you're looking at. You know, look like a cockpit of a space capsule.
It kind of is.
What's that steam coming out your ear? Okay, so let's look at a couple medical terms. SATs, some of you I know are well familiar with this, but SATs means saturation level. So if your body is well saturated with oxygen, a pulse oximeter on your finger will say 90% or 95% or something like that. I've had some respiratory problems, and I was walking to work one day, and my pulse oximeter said 84%. That's a little low for a walking normal human, but I never claimed to be doing that. Edema. If I reached through the screen here and I punched Jared on his arm really, really hard, of course, he'd beat me up afterwards. It would swell, and that swelling is called edema, which is the body rushing fluids in there to protect an injured area. And edema can happen through blunt trauma. It can happen through medical reasons, a disease or something like that. Comorbidity. We're always dealing with comorbidity on TERT. It's not just a broken leg. It's a broken leg with a diabetic. What you got, Jared?
Oh, I don't have anything. Oh.
Oh. I thought you were going to say
you're good.
something. Sorry. So you've got hypothermia, you've got dehydration, you've got electrolyte imbalance, and you've got a nasty patient that doesn't want to be treated, but they've got a broken leg. So that's comorbidity. So you never have just one thing that you're dealing with. There's triage and self-triage. Triage, if you have somebody with a broken leg, that takes priority over somebody with a hangnail, usually. But then there's self-triage on temp. Our heart attack patients don't usually make it to Emerald Lake. They seem to quit before that. And same thing with these breathing problems. Hypo means it goes under, so a hypodermic needle goes under the skin. So with the lower air pressure, which means less oxygen, your body is trying to adjust to that and make changes, but it can't always do that. My source for some of this is Wikipedia, some of it is Medscape. Okay, if you have graphics, Jared, go to first one of the
Okay,
page.
that's the January 2020 doc. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's up.
I don't know why it got labeled that, but. Okay, acute mountain sickness. First suggestion is if the team doesn't have it in the med kit, it would be a good idea to get a copy of what they call the Lake Louise Acute Mountain Sickness Scoring System. And it guides you through asking questions, making simple little decisions, and you can figure out if the patient has acute mountain sickness. Usually it happens above 8,000 feet, but the ski resorts in Colorado have it happen a little bit lower, just not a lot of it. Symptoms: headache, fatigue, stomach, dizziness, general malaise, sleep disturbance. I talked to a life-flight nurse, and they flew a patient out of the UNAs that had acute mountain sickness. Well, had more than that. It was more severe. And the scout group thought he was lazy, so they were picking on him and telling him to shape up, but he had HACE. So AMS can progress to high-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema. That's where your edema word comes in. The tissues are swelling in your pulmonary, your lungs, or the tissues are swelling in your brain. Both very dangerous. 25% of people that go to high altitudes experience HACE or HAPE or one of those. Vitamin I, as Dr. Hooker used to call it, is ibuprofen, and that really takes care of it very well. So HACE, being cerebral edema, if the patient has acute mountain sickness symptoms and they develop a gait ataxia. Ataxia, a good way to call that is call me a taxi, because you're too drunk to walk on your own. Ataxia, they're not able to walk in a straight line doing heel to toe, heel to toe. I know all of you are very familiar with that with your stops from the highway patrol. Or if there's a change in the mental status. If they have to be A&O times 4, alert and oriented times 4, they have to know who they are, where they are, date and time and place, and all that kind of thing. Then HACE is the diagnosis until proven otherwise. So it's pretty simple. If they have the AMS symptoms, they develop the gait ataxia or the mental status, then they've got the HACE until it's proven otherwise. Or ataxia and mental status alone suggest HACE. The sad thing about HACE, it's not just a temporary condition. It can have effects for weeks after, and it can have permanent long-term effects. HAPE is high-altitude pulmonary edema. It's life-threatening. This is what the Scout had in the UNAs. Generally affects people from 8,000 foot elevation and up, which includes TIMP. Vulnerable patients are affected at 4,900 feet, so at the mouth of North Fork Canyon. Classic case of HAPE, somebody living at sea level, they're in LA one day, they're on TIMP the next day, and the body just cannot handle that adjustment. It takes a couple days. So since they didn't wait the 2 days, they didn't get to altitude in Provo and then wait 2 days, they start getting hit with the symptoms day 2 and day 3. So the symptoms, by the way, symptoms are something the patient has to tell you about. Signs are something you can see. It's a sign on their forehead. It's a sign next to them that says, hey, they've got a broken arm. You can see that. That's a sign. Symptom, you can't see it. Shortness of breath at rest. I think most of us have shortness of breath hiking up. A cough, weakness, decreased performance, chest tightness, or congestion. So if they have 2 out of those 4, and then 2 out of 4 of the signs, crackles and wheeze, central blue skin color, rapid breathing, rapid heart rate. So pick 2 and 2, and that tells you if they've got HAPE or not. Okay, on TIMP, we don't run into it that much because they go up and down so fast. They are up, they've gone a mile vertically, 5,000 feet vertically, which you would never do on Everest because your body couldn't adjust. But they go up, they get symptoms, they ignore them, they just go, oh, I'm tired, and then they come down. So we don't end up having to treat them. The solution for acute mountain sickness is to just go down. I've seen scouts on Hospital Rock take a nap, just really lethargic, while the rest of the group went up to the top, and they they were way hurting. Well, got some water in them, got some food in them, started down. By the time they hit high camp, they were bouncing off the rocks. They were doing great because they had more oxygen in their system now. Yeah, I was support for a mountain extreme triathlon, and we had people doing a complete marathon, the bike ride, the swimming, and they were hurting because they'd been in Florida the day before or in Los Angeles the day before. So they're going, man, why am I doing so bad? The reason there's more problems in the UNAs is that they're usually there for a week-long backpack trip. So they're there at altitude long enough to develop the symptoms. Okay, there's one other condition that I didn't have in the notes. HAPE, H-A-F-E, high altitude flatus expulsion. Sounds like a joke, but it's a pressure differential. Your body has gases in the intestines, and when you get up to altitude with the lower air pressure, then it escapes. And they say it happens 11,000 feet or higher, but I've heard barking spiders at high camp. Could be diet related. I found when I eat, the dried foods and reconstitute them, they're never quite fully constituted, and I think that personally causes some of the problem. So no long-lasting effects. It could cause some social distancing, but we're used to that now. And Heidi, the mask you're wearing won't help at all.
I guess that depends on who you're dealing with, but yeah.
Just have enough tents and only one person per tent, so you can't blame anybody else.
All right, awesome, Mike. Thank you. I'm going to check with Chris and see if we've had any questions come in through the chat. Chris. All right, no questions, Chris? Okay, just 1 second. We're going to cut back to the studio here after we give one last thanks to Mike. Really appreciate you, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Back in the studio again here real quick. We're going to talk, or the warehouse. I keep calling it the studio because it sounds cool.
It is cool.
Andrew's going to talk just real quick if there was anything else we needed to touch on with signups and then also attendance. I don't know if we've talked about that much yet, have we? We haven't. Okay, so let me turn your microphone up there, Andrew, and then we'll cut over to you. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks especially to Heidi. Great job on her training, and Mike for what he's done. There was one question that I heard come up on the chat, which was about the medical pack size when Heidi was talking. Really, it depends upon what you really need to bring. As Mark talked about earlier, we already have medical packs for the team, so you don't need to bring a whole medical pack unless that's what your personal preference is. Now, remember, you're carrying this stuff up, so please be wise in what you choose to bring. But that's a personal preference on what you have on a personal medical pack side. And so whatever size is appropriate for the things you're bringing would be the answer. This training is being recorded. We hope to make that available for people that were unable to attend or for you to revisit later if you want to. We are going to count attendance today. And to do attendance, we will have a Google form that you need to fill out. The Google form will ask your email address and name, and then for you to rate this training today and any comments. We ask, of course, you be respectful in the comments. We'd like to know what we did well, what needs to be improved. This is our first time doing this, so please take that into consideration. And we'll have that link available here in a little bit, Jared, so that people can complete that. That's how we're going to track attendance today.
I think so. Chris, do you have it?
We're going to go off of how people that sign up on that form. So please, for credit, you need to go to that form and sign up. Even if you are not a member, you're just visiting you heard about the training, or you're thinking about joining, please go in and put yourself down. Another question I've seen pop up on the Facebook was related to, I missed the new member training that we had last month. I'm not signed up. What do I do to sign up? Very simply, go to the website, TERT.org, and under members, there's a place where you can sign up, get the links. There's 2 forms you need to fill out. There's an application form for TERT, and that needs to be emailed to tertmembership@gmail.com. And then there's also a Utah County volunteer form, and that will have some information for a background check. That has to be sent to the sheriff's office, and the email address is included on that form separately. Those are 2 different forms, 2 different email addresses. If you complete that process already, then we already are working on it, processing it for you. If you haven't done that yet, please do that immediately. The county volunteer form can take 2 to 3 months to get processed because it goes through, after the sheriff's office initially receives it and does background check, it goes to the county and it has to go through a process of approvals in the county level, and we have no control over making that happen. So if it takes 2 to 3 months and you do it now, today, then we'd be able to have you volunteer this summer. If you wait until June or July to turn it in, we probably won't be able to have you volunteer with us this year. So please take care of that immediately to get that process rolling, and then we'll update you when we have that cleared by the county. New members, sign-ups for weekends are now available. The link has been posted into the chat for this training today. If you go to the website under High Camp or Tour Ahead, there are links to a volunteer spot. It says 2019, at least it does right now. We will fix that, but the links do go to the right place, and you can sign up for 2020 when you click on the link through the website. So please go ahead and start signing up. That's available immediately. Jared, you ready to take it back?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. All right, cool. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Mr. Jordan Dye. Give us a hello, Jordan. I think we can hear you.
Hello.
Awesome. There we go. Cool. Let me just talk about you for a second, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome.
So Jordan Dye is an EMT and current student at Utah State University, where he will soon graduate, actually at the end of this month, with a master's in social work. Jordan has worked in the fields of human services and outdoor recreation since 2012. In 2016, he had an opportunity to work as an EMT at a Boy Scout camp and has been passionate about emergency services and disaster response ever since. He's been a wilderness first aid instructor for 3 years, and in 2018, he joined the Utah Army National Guard to further his ability to serve people in times of disaster. As an intern, he has worked with victims of crime and veterans regarding trauma and PTSD. Jordan is passionate about helping people prepare for, live through, and recover from the worst moments of their lives. This includes a special emphasis on helping professionals and the trauma they experience as a part of their work. After graduation, he plans to work in an emergency department as a crisis worker and further his study and research of professional self-care. So with that, we're very lucky to have Jordan with us today, and I think he has some very pertinent topics to share with us. So with that, go ahead, Jordan. I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jared. So trauma response and psychological self-care is here what I'm going to talk about today. It might seem weird, but I get really excited about trauma. So as I talk here, if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat, and if I'm not able to answer them on video, I will respond afterwards in the chat as well. So just a disclosure here about my presentation is I will be talking about trauma and the trauma response, what our body does when we respond to trauma. So if that's a sensitive topic with you and you need to take a break, you need to just talk to someone, please reach out. you are welcome to like reach out to me or to the like National Lifeline crisis line is also the like number is listed there, 1-800-273-8255. That's always a nice like number to know. Like also, while we're on the topic, just some information about our current life and what's happening is if you or someone you know is experiencing psychological distress due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a like national hotline that you can call to get emotional support through that way. I don't have that like number here ready for you, but if you type in the National Disaster Hotline, it will come up online. So what is like trauma? Trauma is simply a like deeply distressing or disturbing experience. It can occur in many ways, many different environments, like abuse, like neglect, rape, any of those, as well as through injury or sickness, like the pandemic, and other ways that way. Mainly, I'll be talking about trauma in like general. If it is specific, it will be about the injury and sickness because that's mostly what we will see on the mountain. So here's just some like basic neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have some like basic knowledge of the brain that helps here in the trauma discussion. So some main like pieces of the brain. We have our reptilian brain, which like this is the part that controls all of our basic bodily functions, and it's instinctive. We don't have a lot of influence or control on that part of the brain. We then have the limbic system, and this is the center of pleasure and fear, and it is also instinctive. And then the top most like prominent like part of the brain is our like neocortex, and that is where logic, planning, control, and whatnot all happens there. And this is the part that we have more conscious control over, which also means it's slower. The other two instinctive parts of the brain react more quickly. So in the limbic system, there's this piece here called the amygdala. And what the amygdala does is it's the alarm system of the brain. So when our brain notices danger, it will trigger the amygdala, that alarm system, and it will then kind of send our body into that trauma response mode. And ways that what happens when that occurs is that our body will begin to produce hormones and other things that changes the way that our body reacts. So we'll jump in here to the trauma responses, many of which you have probably heard of. So there's the classic fight response, where we just go into the mode where we want to do something to counteract whatever's happening. There's flight, where we just want to run away. We want to remove ourselves from the situation. And then there are two more that are not as commonly known, but there's the freeze response. So when our body just kind of shuts down, and this is actually quite common for a lot of people, although not originally talked about. And then newer in the trauma research is the appease response, where especially this occurs in like abuse and whatnot, where we will do whatever we think we need to do to make the trauma stop. And then we have our training. And that's the reason we do like trainings like this, and why we train over and over and over again is we as responders can interrupt that trauma response so that we can act with our training rather than be hijacked by the alarm system of our brain. So with trauma, often, especially as responders, we have an after response where we will experience the trauma responses after the scene has resolved. We'll revert to our training quite quickly, and then afterwards in comes this flood of emotions and all of this that just kind of sinks in once the scene is resolved. So a thought question here for you is, what is your typical response after a traumatic event? And that could be as an experiencer, so you're a part of that trauma, or as a responder. So what does like trauma do? Like trauma can affect our like body and mind in many ways. One great resource to learn a lot more about the effects of the mind of trauma on our mind and body is like Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. That's a great book that like talks about how
All right, just a moment there. I think it says due to poor network connection, we just lost Jordan momentarily. If you be patient just 1 minute, we'll see if it rejoins. And Skype is still attempting auto reconnect. Here we go. Hey, Jordan. No, that's fine. It was just momentarily there. So I think we've got you back now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, trauma can have an influence on like many parts of our like body and our mind, and it can impact our sleep, our dreams, our concentration, our ability to relate to others, our mood, etc., etc. Like one part that I love of the work that I've done with people who've experienced trauma is that human resilience. So our bodies and minds have this natural recovery process that they will recover from this like trauma if they have the opportunity to do so. And in these, there are like times, however, where that recovery is blocked. And often in those instances, we need assistance to continue the recovery process. And that assistance might like be through our personal self-care practice or through professional help. Some like behaviors though that often like get in the way of that recovery process is substance abuse. The idea of I have to be tough, I'm a like medical professional, I can't be weak and experience mental health issues. That idea can have impact on that, and then lack of knowledge about the effect of trauma, and lack of knowledge of the resources that we can use to seek help. So that leads over here to PTSD, and what PTSD looks like. And here I have the symptoms up, but I'm not going to dive into all of these. I will include a link to my slides in the chat here when I'm done. So you can access these, but like memory, it's intrusive into our lives, leads to a lot of avoidance and like negative mood, like impact. So if you are experiencing or similar symptoms, or you know someone who does, I would advise you to seek help from a mental health professional. And then again, with that human resilience is the key piece of what we call post-traumatic growth. And as we come into that recovery piece from trauma, people really can grow and improve as a person, and often it's many years down the road. Many years down the road, they can look back and say that trauma in my life has actually had a positive impact and made me the person that I am today.
I have a question, Jordan.
Yeah.
That post-traumatic growth, does that in any way affect our ability to process traumatic events in the future as well?
That's a great question. And I don't know a ton about the research in that area because I haven't been able to find a lot on it. But from the conversations that I've had with survivors, is it they know some piece of a pattern that they can use when trauma happens to recover from that trauma and lead to that growth more quickly. The one piece where that have hang-ups is often trauma from different things will need different tools. So as long as we remain flexible, and okay, this is what worked last time, but that doesn't mean it will work exactly this time. Then it helps. Because we know a process, and we can like begin in that process, even if the process needs to change slightly as we go.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the responder self-care. What is self-care? And to make it like really simple, to me, why is it important? Well, when we're exposed to trauma, like I've already mentioned, our body and mind takes a toll. And as responders, that is also true. The burnout rate in helping professions is quite high. The two studies linked here on this slide suggest that in between 40 to 67% of healthcare workers experience some level of burnout. And we can reduce that number if we can practice proper self-care. So how do you practice self-care? To me, the two key words here are practice and self. Is that it needs to come through, like trial and error is really often the best way to know, and you need to do something. And as you practice and as you try, you'll learn more about yourself and what works and what doesn't in your life and in your own practice of self-care. So here's just some ideas and some suggestions. I've made a little acronym here of CARE. So these are some options to help with that self-care: is to communicate, align and connect, recognize and explore. So communicate. The negative impacts of trauma thrive in silence and secrecy. So we need to talk about it. We need to talk about trauma. We need to talk about those hard emotions that happen, and that helps us in that trauma recovery process. So talk to other team members on TERT, your friends, your family, mental health providers. Another way that works great for some people is to have what I call a debrief journal. So to me, as a therapist, there's a lot that I hear that I can't like talk about. I'm not supposed to share like key pieces of information that might connect my client to that information. So I keep a like debrief journal where I will, after a hard day or a hard scene or hard like whatever, I will just write out all my thoughts. And the way that I do it is I have it on my computer in a secure document so no one else can access it. And that's one way where if it's harder to talk about or you're not able to talk about it, you can write it out. Like moving on to align and connect. So align and connect with your values, whatever your values are. And I listed some common values here. Like many of us value, that's often like part of the reason why we like do TERT is we want to be on the mountain, and we want to help people. So like knowing what your values are is quite important, especially in that trauma recovery process. As we know what our values, we can live towards our values, and that can have an impact on that recovery and that post-traumatic growth. So in the slides that I will send out, I have a link to a value card sort that if you're interested in what your core values are, you could print that activity out, cut them out, and then you sort through the cards. In the slides, it's down in the notes like portion, there's instructions of how to do that. Like basically you like put it in a pile of what's most important to least important, and then you take the most important pile and you do that again until you're down to like 5 or so of your core values. Like recognize your body sensations, the world around you, your emotions, your thoughts, reactions to providing care. Heidi like mentioned some activities that work great to help to calm down patients. They also work great to help you. So she mentioned the belly breathing and the sensory grounding. One that we often do with this sensory grounding is we call it like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. So you mentioned like 5 things you can see, and you go on down through the senses, and you just like notice what's around you and what is in your environment, and that can really help to center you. So another way here that works great with the recognize is through simple meditation or mindfulness. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose to our body sensations, our thoughts, our emotions, and you don't need anything to do mindfulness. You can like do it while you're walking and simply pay attention to the impact of your feet on the ground as you walk. Or like while you drive, while you eat, like lots of ways that you can do like mindfulness in your everyday. There are those apps that were like mentioned earlier as well that they can help to in that like meditation process. Also, they're not needed necessarily to do mindfulness. Mindfulness, you can just simply pay attention. So I would even invite you right now to take and like be mindful. So what that might look like is you get comfortable in your current position, in your seat, in like wherever you are, and notice your breathing and slow your breathing down to where it's slow and deep, and just like pay attention to your body. Like notice your body as it contacts your chair, your feet maybe as it contacts the floor, and like notice what's coming through your mind, what your thoughts are. And the amazing thing, like with our mind is it's almost always going, like, but we get to choose what we pay attention to. So we might notice our thoughts, but we don't have to dwell on them. We can say, oh, like that was a thought, or, oh, I'm kind of feeling anxious right now, and notice it, and then we can move on past. So you just participated in a mindfulness activity if you did that. So that's one great way to help to recognize what's happening. And then, like, lastly here with the care is explore. So explore your emotions, explore what is like working and what is not in your self-care, and explore new things. Add new things. Many of us have most likely added new things to our self-care strategies during this time of global pandemic, because we might not have access to our typical things. Like many people work to mask their emotions, to hide their thoughts. And now if you're working from home, that might be a little harder. So like there are ways that we can explore and try new things and just see what works. And if it like doesn't work, then like try something else. There are a whole bunch of things that you can try to provide for that self-care. And then here I would also invite to like make a note of that, either on a note on your phone or a journal, like whatever way you want to do that, and note what you're doing for self-care now and what works and what's maybe not working. And then like lastly here, I just wanted to show another option from the book called Trauma Stewardship. This is a like book about working in places where we experience trauma as a part of our work, and like TERT could be considered one of those. And she talks about having the 5 directions for self-care. So one is creating space for inquiry. So asking yourself, like, what's happening? Like choosing what to focus on, building compassion and community, like finding balance, and a daily practice of centering yourself, whatever that looks like to you. That could include meditation, exercise, prayer, like whatever that is to you, that practice to like daily remember who you are and to center yourself. Like lastly here, I just want to end on some self-compassion. Often in our society, it's viewed as weird or abnormal to have compassion towards ourselves. In the research, we've seen that those who exercise self-compassion are like better able to more quickly move to that post-traumatic growth, as well as practice like better self-care because they care about themselves, so they're willing to put in time to that. And there are a lot of like resources out there. One that I love is Kristen Neff. She has some TED Talks that talk about self-compassion and how to bring that into our lives and to just connect there so that we can be more whole as a person. And that helps us as we try to help other people. So that's all I have. Again, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat here, and I will answer them once I'm like done here. But like, thank you for like letting me like be a part of our indoor training.
Thank you so much, Jordan. We really appreciate that. And that's timely information, it feels like, with what we're dealing with just in our everyday lives right now, as well as coping mechanisms for things we might encounter as we serve on the mountain. So thank you again very much. We'll look to Chris real quick and see if we've got any questions on the chat for Jordan. Okay.
So one I
ahead,
actually
Jordan.
see here is, what is the role of teamwork in helping us with trauma? And that's a great question that that's that whole communication piece of, as we work together, we don't all have to bear that load alone, because trauma really can be a heavy load. And we are a team. So you don't have to like take that load alone. Like, talk to each other. Simply talking about it helps to like bring that up and helps in the processing of the trauma.
Okay. Anything else? All right, we're looking good. We will go ahead and say thanks, Jordan. We'll go ahead and close it out, and we will turn the remainder of the time back here to the warehouse with Andrew. Go ahead, Andrew.
All right, so just a few things to finish up with here. The survey has been posted to the chat, and so please complete that to get credit for today. We will also be emailing out the information, so if you're unable to get it in the chat, don't worry. We're going to send out the recording as well as the survey link in an email a little bit later, and the sign up as well. So all that information will be sent out by email. One thing that Sergeant Chappell did not bring up and then wanted to make sure we talked about was at the end of the TERT season, we normally have a get-together and dinner. The Sheriff's Office would like to step that up this year and do a bigger appreciation dinner. We'll probably change the venue. We're talking about maybe like Spanish Fork Fairgrounds area they have access to. So look for a bigger, better appreciation dinner end of the year. Probably be sometime late September, early October, and we'll get more information about that out as we get closer to that time. There's also other thing that came up was, so the Sheriff's Office posted on their Facebook group that they are looking for donations. So just a plug there for the Sheriff's Office, they're looking for donations for senior citizens that are on Meals on Wheels. Sergeant Spencer Cannon has a video, he talks about it. The donations can either be delivered to the Sheriff's Office directly, and they're looking for things like toilet paper, hand sanitizer, things that are hard to get, that are critical for people to have right now. So if you're interested in donating anything you might have excess of, you can either take it to the Sheriff's Office, or they also, if you call the number for Central Dispatch, and they have that number on the Facebook group, they will come and they'll send a deputy to pick the stuff up from you directly if you have things to donate. So just a plug for that for the Sheriff's Office at this time. And finally, we have outdoor training scheduled for May 16th. Originally that would be at Aspen Grove at the Theater in the Pines. Of course, that's just a little over a month from now, and we really don't know what we'll be doing at that point. Will we still be under quarantine, social distancing guidelines, or will those be relaxed? We don't know. So look for more information about that. We're planning on keeping that date right now. If we decide to bump the date or to make changes, we'll let you know. But right now, we're looking at doing it at Aspen Grove. And again, thank you to all the presenters. Big thanks to Jared Matson, Chris Black, and Jeremy Pine that's been in the background here operating the production today. The presenters, we had Sergeant Chappell, Mark Gerberding, Shem, Flitton, Heidi, Vawdrey, Mike Nielson, and Jordan Dye. Thank you for them for the time they took to put this together. You know, this was a new thing for us. We didn't know how it would go. We'll probably do something like this in the future. We'll tweak it and try to improve it. So your input and your suggestions will help to make things better next time around. And thank you for all those. We had, I think we were over 90 people at some point or another had signed in today and watched the live stream. I think this has been very successful. And we hope that you can get excited for and look forward to a good TERT season this year. That we can get out there and help people on the mountain. And thank you again.
All right, great. Thanks, Andrew. With that, we'll go ahead and close it out. We'll leave this final slide up for everybody, just with a few of the final announcements from Andrew there. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.